Yo, what's up guys? So today we are gonna see, what if Naruto finds Kushina after 18 years, and she fell in love with him, movie. Hope you'll enjoy this video. So before we start, go check out the author of this fanfic, Tsukun08, link is in the description, and also subscribe to my channel, and like this video. Let's begin the video. A man sat upon a boulder in Konoha's training ground 8. He was seated in an Indian position, his legs crossed underneath him with his back stiff as a board. His arms stretched out down his legs so his wrists rested on his knees. His hands were in an odd shape. His forefinger and thumb were pressed together to make a circular shape. His middle, ring, and pinky were pointing straight away from his hands, as he sat motionless. His outfit marked him as a shinobi for any who came across the area, his dark gray shirt sticking to his chiseled chest. His six-pack was on display even though he was clothed. His muscles rippled as he took a deep breath, filling his broad chest. On his right arm, his hitai stood proudly displayed, as it gleamed in the sunlight, its black cloth hanging down to his waist. On his waist, a burnt orange-colored sash was wrapped with the extra length hanging down the boulder, showing it would hang to the man's knees if he were to be standing. On his legs, a dark gray pair of pants lay covering his legs. His feet had a sandal and boot combination which provided maximum protection for his feet during taijutsu, but also provided a comfortable fit. The features that were most prominent for this shinobi, however, were on his head. Atop his head, a mop of spiky blonde hair swayed in the wind, as it caught the sunlight, gleaming almost as bright as his hitai. His eyes were closed, but everyone knew that those eyes were as deep and as blue as the ocean his name hinted at. Finally, the lower half of his face was covered by a black face mask much like his previous sensei, but underneath it lay 6 whisker marks that marked him as the of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. After the Pein attack, Tsunade had awoken to attend the 5 Kage meeting. After Naruto had encountered Sasuke again, Naruto had traveled to himself with the help of the toads. He went alone, and confronted Kurabi, or Killer Bee, the only other in the world after Akatsuki had managed to hunt all but those 2 down. He had, with quite a bit of his usual attitude, managed to convince Kurabi it was best that they attend to the front lines, and attacked Akatsuki's main base with just the 2 of them. Before their attack, the 5 Kages had been discussing what to do about the Akatsuki threat when Madara Uchiha managed to inform them of his Moon's Eye plan. After Madara had left, the Kages had decided to hide away Kurabi and Naruto to avoid the Akatsuki getting their hands on them. Little did they know, their efforts would be futile. Kurabi and Naruto had managed to easily dispatch Setsu, leaving only Kisame and Madara as opponents since Team Taki had not been at the base. Kurabi had easily defeated Kisame after overloading his infamous Samahata sword. The sword was meant to eat chakra, and managed to eat away 5 of Kurabi's 8 tails before overloading itself and being poisoned by what it had absorbed. Without his main weapon, Kisame had managed to put up a very good fight, but Kurabi had dispatched him rather readily upon destroying Samahata. Naruto had confronted Madara as soon as he returned from the 5 Kage summit. Using his Sage mode, he attempted to defeat Madara. However, it had proven futile, as Naruto had not been able to land a single hit. When Madara had been assured of his triumph, he played with Naruto and attempted to goad him while stating he was going to destroy Konoha. Naruto had merely smirked as he looked at Madara and revealed his trump card. Naruto had appeared behind Madara in a yellow flash and plunged into Madara's body, managing to do the most damage to him since his fight with the Shodaime. Naruto had taken advantage of Madara's moment of weakness and managed to finish off the supposed immortal being. Thus the 4th Shinobi War was averted by the 2 beings that it was to be fought over. Naruto and Kurabi had regrouped only to be assaulted by Suigetsu and Jugo, with Sasuke right behind them. As powerful as Team Taki was, they held no chance against Naruto's Hiraishin combined with his devastating taijutsu in Sage mode. Both had been knocked unconscious so fast even Sasuke's eyes had trouble keeping up. Kurabi had merely picked the 2 members up, as Sasuke attempted to subjugate the Kyuubi within Naruto. Itachi's gift had activated, permanently sealing Sasuke's and leaving him with his normal Sharingan eyesight. Naruto had proceeded to knock him out, and the last 2 of the world headed back to Konoha to take the biggest lecture of irresponsibility ever given by their Kages. Naruto and Kurabi had simply ignored their talks, as the 2 were now hailed as heroes within the world. Both had separated, but they were great friends even to this day. Naruto's eyes snapped open as he detected an odd chakra signature near the monument to fallen heroes in his old training ground. He would normally ignore any chakra signatures, but this one felt as strong as his own before he left on his training trip about 5 years ago. That was no small amount, and no one within the village came close to it except Jiraiya, and he was out training the next spy master so he could retire. He had managed to flee from Pein and Amigekure, and met back up with Tsunade when Naruto had been attacking Madara. Tsunade had almost sent him back into the grave, but her relief had made her do something she had never done before. She kissed him, and told him to never leave her side again. He had happily complied until she gave him a mission to train the next spy master. He was due back in the village any day now. Naruto's eyes were not his normal blue, however. The orange coloring around his eye along with the yellow iris combined with a horizontal bar for his pupils signified the activation of his Sage mode. He stood up to his impressive full height of 6'2", and bounded off into the woods to see who this odd shinobi was. As he traveled the short distance, he wondered why this shinobi would not have ANBU escorts, especially since he or she was not a shinobi Naruto had met before. He had worked with most ANBU by now, so he was fairly sure he knew almost everyone within the Konoha system. He decided to observe this newcomer before approaching them. His previous battle experiences kept him from making the mistake his younger counterpart may have done, and rushed in introducing himself. He stopped on a tree limb overlooking his old training ground and, suppressing his chakra, spied the lone person standing in front of the monument. He narrowed his eyes as he took in the fully robed figure. The person had its whole body covered in a plain brown cloak, so no one could see any distinguishable features, though the stance the person took led Naruto to believe this person was female. The way the cloak fell did not lend anything else to the observant eyes of Naruto, but he could pick out the slight bulge of a kunai pouch on her leg along with a sword along her back. Just as he was about to jump forward and confront the woman, she turned around, and her eyes locked with his, as his breath hitched. Kushina Uzumaki was back in Konoha after 18 years of running away from her horrid past. She stared down at the monument stone depicting the names of many shinobi who had died alongside her in the Third Shinobi War. Her fingers traced the names of many of her friends who had died in battle, ending on the reason she had left Konoha in the first place even though it was her home. Minato. She thought, as her finger traced the name of the Yondaime Hokage. Theirs had been a secret relationship, but when he had found out she was pregnant he had been as ecstatic as she. She had kept on the active duty roster as long as possible to make less people suspicious, then was put on maternity leave with only Tsunade knowing of it. Biwako Sarutobi had been her birthing doctor even though Tsunade mainly took care of her. She had been out of work for about 6 months when she gave birth to their little bundle of joy. Naruto. She thought, as she scanned the names on the monument looking for his name. She was sure they would honor the sacrifice he made by giving his life to seal that damned Kyuubi. She knew not why Kyuubi attacked, but she could only curse it to hell, as it took both her husband and son from her. She had spent the better part of 18 years running from that damned pervert spy network so she could live in peace with nothing to bother her. She had managed to settle down about 4 years ago, and had been living peacefully until the recent events were made public. That was part of the reason she was in Konoha. She had snuck in to see Tsunade, and tried to get information on how they managed to perfect the sealing of the Kyuubi. Mostly, she was wondering who this hero of Konoha everyone kept talking about was. She had heard many things about him, and she was quite interested in who the identity of this person was. She only ever heard of different names, never his actual name, which was quite odd. Her mind returned to the present, as she looked down at the stone, and realized her son's name was not on the stone. Her anger flared, and she was about to stomp off when her sensors kicked in, and informed her of her guest. She turned around with fury in her eyes as she stared at the man who was hiding in the tree line. Naruto's breath caught in his throat, as his toad sage eyes locked with those furious emerald green eyes. Naruto had never seen such gorgeous eyes on anyone, not even Sakura. He noticed red hair was poking out from the shadows of the hood, but the rest of her face was hidden within the robe's shadows. He stood staring at her for a few moments before she spoke in a clear authoritative tone that had shivers running down Naruto's back, shivers he wished he could forget, as he only ever was hurt by them. He shook that thought off quickly, as he listened to her voice. "Well?" she asked. Naruto withheld a blush, as he realized he had been staring, but quickly recovered, as he remembered his initial reasoning for being in this field. He appeared next to her in a burst of speed enhanced by his toad sage powers, as he towered over her 5 feet 5 inches stature. He crossed his arms, and put on his war face, his toad sage eyes becoming seemingly icy. "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" he asked. "It is polite to introduce yourself first before asking for a person's name," Kushina retorted. Naruto's eyes narrowed, indeed, but not when said person is an invader in your own home. "You are not from Konohagakure, and I have never seen you before. You have no ANBU guards, which means that either you are a native, which I already know you are not, or you are someone who snuck into the village," Naruto explained. "So, who are you, and what are you doing here?" he asked again. If Kushina was impressed, she didn't allow it to show, as she stared into his eyes. Naruto had to consciously tell himself to not fall to her captivating green eyes. She finally asked another question. "If I tell you my name, would you tell me yours?" she asked. "Why would you want to know my name?" he asked. Kushina seemed to hesitate, but she answered, judging from what I am seeing, you are the man they call the hero of Konoha, are you not? She asked. Naruto nodded stiffly. You intrigue me. I wish to learn more about you, she said honestly. Naruto's eyebrow raised. So you came here just to get to know me? He asked with a bit of trepidation. Not entirely. I want to see some old friends as well, Kushina said, deciding to be honest was the best way to go. Naruto nodded. Very well, if you tell me your name I will tell you mine. He responded. He had learned the advantage of keeping secrets in his fight with Madara. Kushina stared hard at him, as if she was trying to tell if he was lying or not before she glanced back at the stone. And Naruto saw the previous fury spring back to life in her eyes. One other question, she said, as he nodded. Why is the previous holder of the Kyuubi not on this monument? She asked. Naruto cocked his head to the side in confusion. What previous container? He questioned. Kushina's face contorted into a scowl, as she thought her son's sacrifice had not even been made known. Not that Naruto could see it. My son's name. The previous container for the Kyuubi. He died the night of the attack, as the seal did not take on him, she stated vehemently. Naruto's body froze, as the implications of what she was saying ran through his mind. Was he the second container? No, Yondaime had said he was the first. His father had said he was the first. With that suggestion thrown out of the window, Naruto's mind began to run through her entire statement, picking up one word. Son. Could it be possible? Kushina did not miss the stiffening of his body, though she knew not what had caused it. Her fury was palpable in the air, as he stood ramrod straight in front of her. He stated in almost a whisper. Did you say your name was? He asked just as quietly. Kushina's fury increased, but she drew herself up to her tallest height, and glared at him through her cloak. Uzumaki Kushina, she said. Naruto felt his mind crash, as it attempted to reconcile with the information in front of him. Here stood his birth mother, from all accounts completely fine, and she had been gone. Where had she gone? What has she been doing? Why wasn't she here? All of these questions raced through Naruto's mind, as his brain rebooted to accept what was right in front of him. It scared him. It frightened him. He knew not what to do, so he did what he did when he was young, and the mobs would come looking for him. He ran. Naruto turned on his heels, and dashed from the clearing. His chakra no longer being concealed flushed over the city, drawing wide eyes from all of his friends. He hadn't done this since his last prank, but he ran, and ran until he could run no more. Then he broke down, and did something he had promised he wouldn't do again after Jiraiya's supposed death. He cried. He bawled his eyes out to the world, as he mourned for something he never had. A mother. Kushina stood shocked at the actions of the man she had just encountered. As soon as she said her name, the man dashed away, as if trying to run from her. Then she felt it. A presence so overwhelming she thought she was in Kyuubi's presence on the night of the attack again. Her sensor blasted her with the impression of 3 different yet same eyes bearing down on her. The first, the same eyes that she had just been staring into, leading her to believe that he was the one with that presence. The second, those same eyes, but his pupils now looked like a skewed cross with slits for the up-down part of the plus sign. The final eyes, ones which had her blasting to her past, were ocean blue eyes that were as deep as the blue they contained. She felt herself tremble under the weight of his presence, as he traveled faster than she had ever felt anyone travel. He was a mere blur to even her sensor ability. His massive chakra moved, as if he was being chased by the Kyuubi himself. Her mind had frozen upon the image of the final set of eyes staring into her mind. The pain and loneliness reflected in his eyes, freezing her in her place, as she attempted to understand why someone who was hailed as one of the most popular people in the world would be lonely. It also struck a chord deep in her heart, as she knew what that loneliness was like, as her whole family had been taken from her. She wondered, briefly, why he would react so badly to just her name, but it was quickly erased, as she felt the ANBU moving towards her location. She suppressed her chakra again, and berated herself that she had allowed her chakra signature out, as she used her considerable stealth abilities to sneak further into the village. She slipped past the net of ANBU, and other strong chakra signatures that had been rushing around since that man's chakra had washed over everyone. She reached out her sensor to try to find him, but his signature had seemingly disappeared. She felt people heading to his last location, but he had moved so far that they would probably take about an hour just to get to him. She sighed, as she felt the last ANBU pass her, and head towards the monument she had just been at. She turned, and headed to her old apartment. She wasn't sure why, but she had a feeling it was still standing, even taking into account everything that had been done to the village since she left. She traveled discreetly, jumping through the woods until she reached the edge. Then she dropped to the ground, and walked out of the brush, heading further into the village with no one capable of detecting her aside from that man. She grew frustrated, as she walked around in circles within the village. Her apartment was guarded by a signature much like that of that same man. She cursed, as she decided to risk it. She wasn't ready to confront Tsunade with the whole village awake right now. She climbed the stairs with the skill of a kunoichi she had gained during her childhood of fighting, her steps lithe and graceful, as she bypassed the creaky wooden stairs to make her seem like a ghost. As she made nary a sound while she continued to the top floor of the apartment building, she smirked as she reached the top floor. Still got it, she thought. She walked to the end of the hallway, and took out an old key from within her cloak. With the parting of her cloak, one could see she had tight-fitting clothes hugging her curves. The armor would look to be regular NBU standard in a pitch-black color, with the only color being a splash of red stripes running down the sides of her outfit. She reached forward and unlocked the door. She smiled and opened the door, only to freeze at the sight of the same man standing in front of her from before, though his eyes were no longer horizontal bars with yellow irises and orange coloring. They were the same blue she had seen earlier, causing her body to freeze as his gaze locked with hers. "Who?" the man started to say, only to grab his head, as if in pain. Kushina watched as the guy stumbled slightly before his eyes snapped to hers with cold fury, but a hint of curiosity underneath. "I believe you should go see Hokage-sama." "Kushina-san," he said in a cold voice. Kushina looked slightly taken aback. "I'm not ready to face her just yet." "How in the hell did you get here so quickly from where you ran?" she asked angrily. "Why are you even here?" Her anger flashing in her green eyes as she glared at Naruto. Naruto's eyes softened a bit as he said, "I don't care if you aren't ready. If you don't go see her soon, there could be widespread panic." Kushina looked confused as her anger seemed to fade with his odd statement. "As for your other questions, I was always here, and I am here because this is my apartment," he answered with finality. Kushina looked at him incredulously for a second before she said, "Kage Bunshin." Naruto nodded. "Boss always leaves one at home in case someone needs something," he replied. "This is my apartment that wouldn't have been given to you," Kushina said. "All will be explained when you go talk with Hokage-sama." The clone clutched his head again. "If you don't go see her before the boss gets here, this could get quite messy. We aren't known as the most powerful ninja in the elemental countries for no reason, Kushina-san. Please go see Hokage-sama so nothing happens." Kushina looked back outside and noticed there was about an hour until nightfall. "I will go see her at nightfall," she said. The clone looked at her for a few moments, then cocked his head to the side, as if calculating something or receiving orders. "Very well, but you will have to stay in this living room. Boss doesn't trust you," it said. Kushina's eyes narrowed, wondering if she could dispel the clone for distrusting her, but she decided she would show this hero why she was the red hot-blooded habanero, but decided she would show the original firsthand. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her as she went and sat on the sofa. There was a tense 45 minutes until Kushina said, anger still present in her voice, "You never told me your name," she accused. The clone looked at her and smiled under his face mask. "No, I guess I didn't. You will learn it soon enough." "I don't want you creating a scene when you find out," he said. Kushina's eyes narrowed again. "Why would I cause a scene? Even if I did, I doubt it could be as big as when your boss let his chakra go uncontrolled," she retorted. The clone's smile disappeared, as it was reminded exactly who this was. "You will cause a scene because you will be pissed. I don't think the village can take another chakra signature like yours to go out of control just yet," he retorted, and they both fell into silence until the sun disappeared. "Time to go. See you soon, Kushina-san." The clone's toned back to being its icy cold, sending shivers down Kushina's spine. She glared at it as it suddenly disappeared. She sat there a little while longer, debating what to say, when she finally sighed and stood up, heading out to the Hokage Tower. Naruto sighed as he felt his clone dispel. He had finished crying after about 20 minutes. He had never really cried that long since the old man's death. He knew that she was his mother, but she didn't seem to hate him for being so. He was curious about her action. He slipped under the ledge to the Hokage's office. He knew Tsunade would still be in the office, as she always took longer to do the paperwork than should be done. He was curious about what this was going to reveal. He had never asked Tsunade or Jiraiya about his mother, as he had been too absorbed with what was going on with the world then training when he got back that he hadn't even claimed his father's last name yet. That didn't mean he wouldn't hold some resentment over the fact they would neglect to tell him after he had revealed he knew his father. So, he hid his chakra signature, as only he and Jiraiya could do, and settled in to listen to an enlightening conversation between his birth mother, and though he would never admit it, his mother figure. Kushina snuck past all of the NBU, and made it to the Hokage's door. She reminisced for a few moments, wondering how long it had been since she had seen her old friend. She was curious what the years had done to her. She sighed as she thought of how lax security seemed. She knocked politely on the door, figuring since she had gotten here any remaining ANBU would be dismissed by Tsunade herself once she confronted her. "Come in," a tired voice said. Kushina easily recognized her friend's voice after all these years. She pushed the door open and stepped inside, quickly shutting the door, as she looked around the room to notice it hadn't changed much in the almost 2 decades she had been gone. She saw Tsunade's questioning look, but did not speak up, as Tsunade had not asked her any questions. She continued scanning the room with her eyes, as she counted mentally, 1 behind the bookcase, 2 by the windows, and there should be 1 more right by the door of course. She thought to herself, as she picked up the 4 hidden chakra signatures within the room before Tsunade could speak. Who are you? Tsunade said with curiosity in her voice. You might want to make this conversation a bit more private, Hokage-sama, or some serious repercussions could be set in motion by carelessness. Kushina replied in a cold tone. Tsunade's eyes narrowed at the perceived threat. Are you threatening me or my village? She questioned with a hint of anger lacing her voice. That would not be wise, Kunoichi-san, especially since I could snap you like a twig before you could do so again. Kushina smiled under the cover of her cloak. The same old Tsuchan. This has something to do with Erasure Kazama, she said. Tsunade's eyes widened, as she stared hard at the woman in front of a few who knew that name, and she could count them on one hand. Tsunade waved her hand. Leave us, she said. The 4 hidden ANBU appeared, and bowed before shining away. Tsunade reached under the Hokage's desk, and activated the security seals within the room. The walls glowed blue before Tsunade fixed one of her most lethal glares on the woman in front of her. Talk, she said. Naruto cursed his luck. Then thanks to Kamihi, and Erosenin had placed seals that allowed them to bypass the Hokage privacy seal while on this ledge. Convenient? No, it was a way for their spy masters to be able to help the Hokage without them knowing. The best part was, only someone keyed into the array would be able to use the seal, and currently, only Naruto and Jiraiya were keyed in. The new spy master would be keyed in once Jiraiya returned. His lips formed into a foxy grin under his face mask. It was good to be a prankster. Kushina's smile never wavered, as she looked at her old friend. Now, is there any way to talk to an old friend, Tsuchan? Kushina said, her icy tone replaced with a playfulness she hadn't felt in over 18 years. Tsunade's eyes widened. That voice. She hadn't heard that voice in over 18 years. Plus, only one person called her Tsuchan. Kushina? She exclaimed. Is that really you? 1,000 scenarios running through her mind, as she tried to figure out what was going on. She was supposedly dead. Kushina chuckled slightly, as she finally pulled her hood back, revealing her face for the first time. Naruto, who could still see despite not being in the room, jaw dropped, as he beheld the beauty that was Uzumaki Kushina. Her face was angular, no doubt from the intense training she must have done in her absence. Her jawline led upwards to strong cheekbones that ended in a sharp nose. Her eyes were an emerald green that sucked Naruto in just as the first time he managed to glimpse them through her cloak. The light finally reaching them did terrible things to Naruto's self-control. Her hair was a bright red that fell down to her mid-calves. 2 bangs framed her face, one side hanging down to her full, luscious red lips. The other was held up by a hair clip, but it only served to enhance her already fair skin. All in all, Naruto could definitely tell why his father could have fallen in love with the angel in front of him. While he may have been dense when he was younger, his current lifestyle, author of the Ika Ika series, forced him to appreciate the female body, leading to him shamelessly admitting that his mother was definitely one of the most beautiful women he had ever seen even without seeing her body. He brushed these thoughts out of his head, as he refocused on the conversation between the 2 kunoichi. Tsunade's own jaw dropped, as she beheld how Kushina looked. What the hell? You don't look a day over 20, she accused to the increased chuckling of Kushina. I love the look on your face, Kushina said, as her chuckles became full-blown laughter at the incredulous look from Tsunade. Tsunade's face developed a tick mark indicating her anger, as she started to growl slightly. Kushina, she said in a low menacing voice, causing Kushina to sober almost instantly, as she knew this was going to be an important talk. Alright, enough horsing around, I suppose you want an explanation, she said. Getting a curt nod from Tsunade, she better have a good reason for abandoning Naruto-kun. The brat may be annoying, but he doesn't even know her name yet. Oh, how wrong she was. Kushina sighed, as she walked forward, and sat down in the chairs before the Hokage desk. Her eyes flashed to Minato's picture, and an expression of sorrow went across her face, as she saw his picture. She turned back to Tsunade, and began her story. Long story short, once the ceiling failed, I left the village with nothing to keep me here. I spent the last 18 years running from Jiraiya's spy network. I managed to settle down about 4 years ago, but once I heard of this hero of Konoha, I wanted to see him myself, as well as see what this new seal looked like since the one for my son didn't work. I had heard that this hero beat Madara. Also, I should pay my respects since my hurt was finally starting to fade, so I made my way here. I snuck into the village, and here I am. She left out her meeting of the hero, as she wanted to find out more about him before saying that she had upset him. Tsunade's face was one of confusion almost from the first word that had left Kushina's mouth. Failed sealing? The seal didn't fail. Hero of Konoha, does that mean she doesn't know Naruto is that hero? What the hell is going on? She rubbed her forehead, as she felt a headache coming on. She was getting too old for this shit. Which reminds me, Tsu-chan, why isn't Naruto's name on the monument stone? She asked with cold fury burning in her emerald orbs yet again. Naruto's heart almost burst, as he heard the final key to the fact that this was definitely his mother. She had explained her actions, but he still held a small bit of resentment in that she hadn't returned for 18 years. Tsunade's eyes showed her age, as she sighed. Kushina, who told you the ceiling failed? She asked. Kushina's eyes narrowed, but she answered, NBU, now answer my question, Tsu-chan. Her chakra spiked a bit, but the privacy seals made it so no one, but the three individuals there felt it. Tsunade's eyes narrowed at Kushina. Don't you be demanding things from me, Kushina-chan. There is much more going on than you know. It seems I must be the one to tell you. Tsunade sighed, as she rubbed her temples again. The first thing that should be told to you is that the seal never failed. I don't know if Danzo's roots were the ones that told you of Naruto's death or Sensei's, but either way they are both dead, so it means little now, Tsunade said with a heavy amount of tiredness in her voice. Kushina froze in her seat, as possibilities ran through her mind. The only thing she could respond to was, "What?" she said in a strangled voice. Tsunade turned to her with a sad look, as she said, "I said that the ceiling never failed, Kushina-chan. Naruto has been alive all this time, here in the village." Kushina's eyes were unfocused, as her mind ran what had just been told to her through her mind. He's alive? She thought incredulously. He has been alive all this time? Where is he? I need to see him. What was his life like? Is he married? He must be a lady killer by now. Okami, I wasn't here his whole life. Her thoughts continued racing, as thousands of implications came crashing down on her all at once. Tsunade watched, concerned, as Kushina's face flitted from expression to expression with increasing frequency until, after almost 5 minutes of silence, her face settled into pure determination. Where is he? She asked. Tsunade hesitated. She could tell her about Naruto, but how would Naruto react? He had been fine with his father, but his mother was alive, and if this wasn't dealt with carefully, there would be dire consequences if she set Naruto off. He could very well attack and kill Kushina in a fit of rage. He would regret it later, but he was quite impulsive, and even with his recent changes she didn't think he should learn of this from Kushina unless the full explanation was given before he saw Kushina herself. With this in mind, she made her reply, I can't allow you to see him. She was cut off, as Kushina's chakra spiked dangerously. You will tell me where my son is now, Tsunade? Kushina roared, as she glared murder at her friend. I have been absent from his life for 18 years, and I will not be absent any longer now that I have the chance to get to know him, she stated vehemently. Tsunade looked at Kushina with a level head. Odd that her usual temper was replaced with cold hard logic, as she stared down the famous red hot-blooded habanero. But she wasn't known as the slug princess of Konoha for nothing. She barely flinched, as Kushina's legendary sword appeared in her hand, as she leaned on her own desk with her fingers interlocked. Kushina, you need to calm down. There is a reason. Tsunade was again cut off. Calm down, Kushina said on the verge of hysterics. I abandoned my own son for 18 years because I believed lying scum, and couldn't face my past for that long, she screamed. I need to see him. I need to apologize. Does he even know of me? Of his father? She asked. As she talked her anger out, wheels began turning in her head. Who in the village could be her son? Tsunade glared at Kushina. She sent a concentrated blast of Ki at her which managed to get some of Kushina's attention. I have a reason I can't let you see him yet, Tsunade said, stressing the yet to get Kushina's full attention. As Kushina's eyes narrowed at her, Tsunade began her explanation. There is much you don't know about him, and I don't believe you should be the one to inform him of your life and what you have been doing. He might not listen to it all unless someone closer to him tells him about it. Kushina's head was now running in a full sprint. The way she talks is, as if I should be scared of him. He should be one of the strongest shinobi in Konoha, but I know no one who is high rank that is blonde hair and blue-eyed except that hero guy who is also her thoughts trailed off, as her mouth spouted out the last of her thought. It sounds like you're afraid he might go on a rampage and kill me, like he is. Kushina's eyes widened. Of course the hero is Naruto-kun. I need to find him. Tsunade cursed, seeing Kushina figure it out. Kushina, I am warning you. I can't let you see him, she said vehemently, but she saw Kushina coils spring out of her window. Tsunade cursed again, as she sunshined behind Kushina, and sent a chop aimed to knock her out. I'm sorry, but this is for his own good, she said. Kushina suddenly froze, as her senses went haywire. 1 second she was feeling the attack Tsunade had sent to her neck, and the next she was encompassed by that same overwhelming presence from before while simultaneously feeling Tsunade's attack being stopped, as he appeared in front of her. His blue eyes glaring over her head, as she looked straight at his chiseled chest. She barely registered how she moved slightly closer to him, as he arrived. Naruto glared at Tsunade. Now, Bachan, can't you attack one of my precious people now, can I? He asked cheekily, though his glare said otherwise. I think Kushina-san, and I have much to discuss. Tsunade's eyes widened. How dash? She started only to see Naruto was preparing to leave. I was Jiraiya's student, he said before both he and Kushina disappeared. A note floated on the residual wind left by his technique. It read, going to unseal his house. Her eyes widened, and she sat back down in her chair wondering what was going to happen. Naruto and Kushina appeared outside of a large compound. Kushina's eyes roved madly in their sockets, as she tried to take in everything at once. Her mind moved at 1,000,000 miles a minute, as she surveyed the landscape that now presented itself to her. She saw how they were in the clan district of the Konoha going from what she remembered. The street suddenly became frighteningly familiar, as she recognized a certain bench posted right next to the door of a compound. Her eyes widened, as she looked down the street, and, just as in her memories, there was a small park that she had loved to play in, as a child. Her blood chilled, as she turned her head back to the man standing next to her going through some hand seals. Barrier Kai, Naruto said, as he put his hands on the floor. The air shimmered slightly before the compound was replaced with a cozy home nestled behind a wall with tall trees covering most of the front. Her eyes locked on the symbol emblazoned on the wall's door. Naruto, still having said nothing to Kushina, walked up to the door, and bit his thumb, swiping his blood over the symbol, unlocking the hidden seal underneath the crest. Her eyes watered, as she held further proof of this man being her son. The crest of Minato Namikaze glowed, as the hidden seal was unlocked, allowing those of his or her blood within the grounds. The doors swung open, as she felt her tears sting her eyes, as she began to speak, and Naruto kept his back to her, as he said, "This is quite private, Kushina-san. Please refrain from talking until we are inside." He began to walk forward, pushing the gates open, as his still crying mother stood shocked at his tone, and the way he acknowledged her. Kushina-san, she thought. Her eyes came alight, as a determination not unlike Naruto's flared within her. Thoughts of her son wiping away most of her pain. I will make it up to you, Sochi-kun. She thought. Her tears dried, as she used all of her considerable willpower to wrestle her thoughts from times with Minato to focus on regaining her son. She straightened her back, as she followed her son onto their grounds, and shut the gates behind them. Kushina watched, as Naruto moved silently through the mighty forest that surrounded what was supposed to be Minato's clan house, starting with Naruto's birth. They had lived in Kushina's apartment until he heard about Naruto being born. He had these grounds built to accommodate his new family, as he hoped it would grow. Now it was a painful reminder to what should have been, but Kushina managed to force her sadness down, as she reminded herself about her son, and her determination returned in full force. She expected him to lead them to the house, but he walked right past the house, heading to the backyard of the magnificent mansion Minato had constructed for his family. He had lined it with seals for only his own family so they could gain access. As such, not even Jiraiya had been in here since Minato's death. Kushina stopped for a moment, assuming he was going the wrong way, but when he made no attempt to even stagger his stride, Kushina realized he was heading elsewhere. She quickly caught up with him, as the two rounded the corner of the house to see the magnificent training grounds Minato had put into the background of the grounds. Kushina's eyes narrowed in sorrow and hurt. Naruto entered a bare clearing, no trees or training dummies, no rocks or hard places, simple grass covering an expansive field, as big as the exam stadium. He reached the center, and finally turned around to face his mother since the time he had figured it out at the monument stone. He glared down at her, drawing a hurt look from her, but he did not falter. Kushina shuffled under his intense scrutiny. She was determined to get him back, but she knew that she had been absent since his birth. She could do nothing if he decided to simply ignore her. Was everything you told Bachan true? He asked in a dead cold voice. Kushina's eyes snapped to him. You heard all that? How? I know those seals are impenetrable, she said. Naruto's eyes narrowed. How I bypassed them is none of your concern. Or would you rather talk about seals instead of why you abandoned me at birth? He asked in cold fury. Kushina flinched back. You have no right to be questioning me. Answer my questions, and we will see if I will talk more with you. Naruto stated in the same tone he had initially spoken to her, cold, emotionless. Kushina's eyes burst into life at that. He isn't totally adverse to me. I still have a chance. She stared directly into his eyes as she said, yes, everything I said is true. Naruto's cold blue eyes stared into Kushina's rock-hard emerald orbs. A contest of wills battling it out, as the two tried to impose their own wishes onto the other. The air grew heavy with tension, and both shinobi tensed as their bodies reacted to the obvious battle. Neither moved after their initial tightening of muscles, each daring the other to make the first move. Kushina was prepared to fight for her right to know her son. The tension suddenly disappeared, as mirth entered Naruto's eyes. It is a pleasure to finally meet my birth mother. he said while his visible eyes clenched slightly, signifying his mouth smiling underneath his face mask. I was told I got my attitude from you, and from what I have seen, I must say that appears true, he said in a noticeably happier voice. Kushina relaxed, as the first true smile of over 18 years cracked her face in half, as she said, so? Naruto's eyes lost their mirth. Do not call me your son, he said in a cold voice again. Kushina frowned. You may have given birth to me, but I have no parents. His voice carried his anger, as he said he had no parents. Kushina looked stunned. What? She asked. You just called me your mother, she accused. Naruto shook his head. No, I called you my birth mother, he responded. You can't not have parents. So Kushina was interrupted with a burst of ki, leaving her stunned at the intensity of it. I was raised in an orphanage from the time I was born to the time I was 8. After that, I took care of myself until legally becoming an adult in the village, and even took care of myself another full year before leaving on my training trip. I was raised by no one. I was given birthday presents by one person, who was a grandfather to me. I was taught to read, write, and use the bathroom by myself. I had no one to tuck me in after a long day of work. I was not congratulated while doing something good by anyone. Parents raise their kids, and teach them to do all of the stuff I have taught myself how to do, all without help. His voice full of rage. As he continued talking, I was not raised by you, and I will not have you trying to claim something you are not. Kushina's face showed the tremendous hurt she felt, as he said this. Her heart clenched painfully in her chest, as she acknowledged that everything he said was completely true. So you would have nothing to do with me? She asked steadily. Naruto's glare was replaced with a sad look. No, he said, causing Kushina's eyes to harden in determination. Not if you wish to be my mother. He finished, drawing a surprised look from Kushina. How else would you wish to have a relationship with me? She asked with curiosity in her voice. Friendship, he replied readily. Kushina's curious look was replaced with another frown. However much you may try to deny it, I am your mother. So again she was cut off. I acknowledged what you were. Stop trying to call me son. You have not earned that. Perhaps in time I may see you, but I doubt it. The time for formative figures in my life is over. I am an adult in more ways than just legally. There is no place for a mother within my life now that I am at this stage. Think long and hard, Kushina-san. Do you wish to continue to alienate me because you wish to try to force yourself on me? His voice was hard and piercing straight to her heart. Or, his voice softening, as he looked at her with almost a pleading stare. Would you rather start off as friends, build a relationship that may lead to what we should have had, bar-lying bastards, or one that at least allows you interaction with the only living relative you have, and by extension my own? He asked. Kushina's eyes turned downward as she grew introspective. What he is saying is totally absurd. One moment he is saying I am his mother, the next he says he doesn't have any parents. What the hell happened to him? However, what he is suggesting is quite mature. It makes me proud to see him so strong, and so wise. Even if his logic does seem screwed up, the way he explains our relationship would be accurate. He has every right to ignore me for what I have done. Granted, it wasn't totally my fault. I was still a coward. But the question is, can I treat him just like a friend, and not be a mother? I know I was always a bit of a tomboy, but my instincts just scream at me to baby him even though he is like this. I could try though. It makes the most sense even if it pains me to acknowledge it. She thought to herself. She slowly looked up with sadness in her eyes, as she said, very well, Naruto-kun. She smiled hesitantly at the familiar honorific she put behind his name. Naruto's eyes cracked slightly as he said, Arigato, Kushina-chan. He chuckled slightly at the dumbfounded look on her face. Kushina's hand pointed at Naruto, as it shook slightly, and she said, You can't call me that, she said. Naruto's eyes cringed even more, as his smile widened. Why not, Kushina-chan? He added to tease her. Because I'm your mother. Kushina finished, in her head coming up with no other explanation than that. She huffed, as she refused to break her attempts at just being his friend. Naruto chuckled. Why do you wear that mask, Naruto-kun? She asked, making her transition in what to call him readily enough. Her curiosity had hit her full force when she realized what had happened. Naruto cringed away. There is a real long story behind it, but basically he trailed off while scratching the back of his head. He sighed, and reached up to his mask, pulling it away from his face. His face turned sheepish, as Kushina did exactly what every other woman did when seeing his face. Kawaii, Kushina said breathlessly, as she saw his whisker marks combined with his angular face and strong jawline produced quite the effect on the ladies when he had finally matured. He kept it hidden to reduce the amount of fangirls he would have. That is the reason my face is usually hidden, he said, as he chuckled, allowing his slightly elongated canines to peek out from under his lip. It also leads to women not hounding me for dates just because of my looks. Dates? Kushina growled, her instincts already kicking in. Naruto's grin almost vanished, but he was pretty understanding, and decided to tease her, despite him acknowledging her, As his birth mother he had no qualms in seeing her, as she is, one freak piece of woman that any man, including himself, would happily die for a chance at being in a relationship with. He was quite shameless in admitting it to himself, though he would probably never say that out loud. He didn't feel admitting it to himself would hurt him, as he would never make a move on her anyways. "Does Kushina-chan not like the idea of me being on a date?" he asked teasingly. "Does she want me all for herself?" he asked with a foxy grin on his face. Kushina's face scrunched up into a frown, and slightly disgusted look until she saw Naruto's million-watt grin. Her eyes narrowed, as she saw his shoulders shaking. "He wants to play that way, huh?" she thought to herself. Let it be known, Kushina was known as the prankster queen of hell in her youth. "I ain't saying no," she said, as she turned around with an evil grin on her face before shining to her apartment to take it over from Naruto. Naruto's jaw dropped, as he heard his newest friend's confession. His mind turned, and churned, as her statement replayed in his mind. He felt his clone from his apartment being dispelled, as he had set another one after Kushina left. He sighed, as he heard her declaration, "My apartment, sleep in that house for now," she told his clone before dispelling it. His mind still trying to digest what she had said, Naruto trudged to his new home. Unknown to the both of them, this would lead to what no one would ever expect, and their undying happiness. Naruto groaned, as he rolled around in a soft, fluffy bed. Soft and fluffy, he thought. This isn't my apartment. His discovery left him confused for a moment, as he unnoticeably stretched his body while still lying on the very soft bed. His mind finally settled, as he realized what had happened yesterday. He rolled over, and allowed a few tears to escape his eyes, as he grieved one last time for the loss of something he had thought he put behind him, his parents. He knew that he would never see Kushina, as she wanted him to. He had been honest when he said that there was no room for someone to just try to put their own will upon his own, which was what parents do. They impose their own decisions on their children to lead them in the correct way. For example, they would show how it was indecent to show one's food while eating. They would explain how men and women love each other, the areas where one could be intimate, and what to keep behind closed doors, basically showing their children right from wrong. For any kid out there reading this, and there shouldn't be any of you since this is an M-rated FIC, I want to make this clear. Listen to your parents. Many times they will know better than you. You will think they don't know what they are talking about, but they do. They have lived longer than you have. I know you hear this all the time, but just do it. Trust me, it makes your life a whole lot easier. Naruto had learned all of this on his own or through the slums where he lived, as a kid. No one had taught them. He had learned the hard way with no one to correct him if he did something wrong until he did it in public. Many times he would be led to believe a certain action was okay just to be told by others that it wasn't. His hands clenched, as he thought of the trouble he would get into just because he had no one to teach him. He took a deep breath and let loose a shuddering sigh, as his body relaxed and he allowed his indignation to be washed away. Today is a new day, no thinking about the past. Let's get to know each other, he said to himself, as he nestled into the bed a bit further. But first, 5 more minutes. He smiled, as his eyes closed and he snuggled into his newer, fluffier bed. Not a chance in hell. Get your ass out of bed. A female voice snapped only for Naruto to feel himself thrown out of his comfortable bed. Hey, he shouted indignantly, as he stood from the floor showing his chiseled chest, as he only slept in some pants preferring to sleep almost nude. His eyes immediately landed on Kushina. He had to fight the massive blush that threatened to rush to his face. He had seen his mother's face, but her body had constantly been covered by her cloak. She was dressed almost as if she wanted people to look at her. Her hair was pulled into a ponytail behind her, giving her a younger look, even though her face didn't show it. She was almost 38. I'm going on the assumption she was giving birth to Naruto at 20 since I can't find an actual age that Kushina died. As Tsunade had said, she didn't look a day over 20 with unblemished skin, and her silky red hair hanging down to her back. This, however, was not what caught Naruto's attention. Kushina was wearing a skin-tight shirt and trousers, both black with the Uzumaki swirls on her shoulders. Her pants had dark orange stripes running down the sides of them. On her feet were standard shinobi sandals. Her hands had fingerless black leather gloves finishing off her ensemble. Even all of this was not enough to grab Naruto's attention like the curves his newest friend exhibited. His eyes roved her body from top to body, heedless of the fact he knew she was his birth mother, showing their firmness as they followed her every move despite her age. His eyes traveled down to her toned stomach, which peeked out under her shirt before continuing on where her pants covered her slim waist until it widened back out to her firm backside. This was all attached to legs that seemingly went on forever, giving Kushina the perfect hourglass figure which any woman would strive for. It was obvious she kept in shape. Kushina herself was struck at Naruto's bare chest. Though she knew that he was her son, she couldn't help that little voice in her head that told her she had given birth to one of the hottest men on the planet. His chest rippled with energy as he breathed, each perfectly sculpted muscle moving in unison, showing how well he kept in shape. She had seen Minato's chest, and many men besides him, but Naruto just beat them all, his six-pack standing out on his stomach leading down to the pants he had on. She noticed only one problem with his perfect chest, a scar about the size of a fist over his right lung. Her eyes roved hungrily until she snapped at herself, "Stop it. He is your Sochi," and a tiny voice couldn't help but snap back, "He doesn't see it that way." Her eyes snapped to his face as she heard this, and her slight blush went to a neon red as she realized he was checking her out. She grinned slightly as she pushed her blush down and moved her chest so it swayed back and forth, loving how his eyes were glued to it once she started moving. Though she knew it was wrong, she couldn't help but tease him. "Pervert," she finally said, as she stopped moving and waited for his eyes to snap to hers. Naruto flushed a heavy red, but he didn't sputter as he stared straight at Kushina. "Yeah," he answered nonchalantly. "But what did you expect with my teachers?" He started grinning internally, as he knew his teachers were about to get the beating of a lifetime. Kushina's eyes narrowed. "Who are your teachers?" she asked. Naruto smiled mischievously. "Now I think if we talk here we won't have anything to talk about the rest of the day," he said, as he smiled a little wider at her. Kushina looked a bit confused at the sudden change of topic. She said. Naruto crossed his arms over his chest, as he said, "I think we will go grab some lunch since it seems so late. Then I am going to take you to go shopping, as my friend is not walking around looking like a billboard for everyone to ogle her," he said, as he waved at her outfit. "Then I have a get-together with my friends tonight, and I would like to introduce you to them," he said with a cheeky grin on his face again. Kushina frowned. She hated shopping, but looking down, she didn't want anyone ogling her. She always wore a cloak since she left Konoha, and would just beat any pervert stupid enough to make a move on her. Though she was rather comfortable with Naruto, though that may be because she didn't see him as a potential lover, she couldn't see herself comfortable in front of anyone else like this, so she nodded. "On one condition," she said. Naruto looked at her suspiciously and nodded. "We get ramen for lunch, and you're paying," she said with a cheeky grin. Naruto's laugh was loud as he held his sides. Kushina looked confused until Naruto said, "I definitely inherited your appetite. Ichiraku's for lunch then. Let me get dressed unless you'd like to continue ravishing my body with your Kushina-chan eyes." He started with his cheeky grin back in place. He had no problem with her looking at him like that. He knew others did it, and he wasn't bothered by them. Why should he be bothered by her? Kushina, to her credit, didn't blush as she turned back around and proceeded out of the room. "Perv," she said. Naruto chuckled as he started to get ready for his day out. Kushina and Naruto walked down the streets of Konoha, drawing the stares of men and women alike. Both rubbed their bellies in a contented fashion as they proceeded to the first shop of the day. Naruto sighed happily as he let his half-lidded gaze pan around his surroundings. Though he looked like he was off guard, his sensor abilities were constantly active. He wasn't surprised to feel the ANBU Black Ops top team was following them around. He smiled slightly, letting his amusement show through, as Tsunade was worried about him. He silently shook his head slightly at the direction of the captain, who was Niji, from what Naruto could feel. Kushina suddenly spoke up. "She is really worried, isn't she?" she said. Naruto turned to his mother and kept his half-lidded gaze. "Wouldn't you? The Jinchuriki of the Kyubi no Kitsune, which thrives on negative feelings, is walking around with his absent mother of 18 years. He responded, not letting anyone but her hear him. Her content face was replaced with a frown as she looked downwards. "I'm sorry," she said. Naruto shook his head. "Sorry, I ruined the mood. I don't hold any bad feelings. Let's just forget it, please," he asked with a slight puppy dog pout. Kushina giggled, but it had little effect, as she replied under her breath. "How can you just forget that though?" she asked with hesitancy in her voice. Naruto looked at her with piercing blue eyes, as he responded in the same soft voice so they couldn't be overheard. "Simple. I forgive it. It does no good to hold a grudge against you," he admitted to Kushina's surprise. "Besides, I would like to get to know my only relative, even if we should be closer than we ever get," he said with some sadness. Kushina nodded and smiled slightly as Naruto. "Thank you," she said. Naruto simply nodded, and the two turned and restarted their trek through Konoha. They had been walking in a comfortable silence for almost 5 minutes before Kushina suddenly asked, "So can I start asking questions now?" Naruto looked at her and, after a few seconds, said, "I won't answer everything. There are some things in my past that no one should know about. If it doesn't infringe on that, I will answer anything you ask," he said with steel in his voice. Kushina frowned. "Was your life really that bad?" she asked quietly. Naruto's answer was just the barest of whispers, "Yes." Kushina again looked down, and a tense silence fell for another 5 minutes, as they continued wandering aimlessly through the village. Naruto knew where he wanted to go to get his newest friend's clothes, but he was content to let her ask questions before starting the shopping. He decided to jumpstart her slowly. I had very little during my childhood. It was a bleak and very lonely time for me. I really only had the Sandang, Tuchi, and I am Chan for friends or people of importance. I lived in the orphanage until I was 8 years old, and then I was given your old apartment as I went to the academy. As you can imagine, the teachers weren't too happy with me, so I began pranking to keep attention on myself. I have to say, my pranks were complete genius. He started with a chuckle, as Kushina finally looked up at him. One time, I painted the whole Hokage monument in plain daylight. I led the ANBU on a chase for hours before they finally caught me. His smile was wide even if Kushina could only tell because of his eyes, as his face mask was back on. I failed the academy 2 times before finally passing on the 3rd time when Mizuki, one of my teachers, managed to trick me into stealing the Forbidden Scroll, and I learned the Kage Bunshin in 2 hours. I found out about my burden, and Irika-sensei's true feelings about me. I was so happy when he passed me I couldn't stop myself, and I managed to prank the Hyuga compound. He chuckled again, and his smile widened, as he saw Kushina stifle a giggle. Kushina took over. So who were your senseis? She asked, the righteous woman fury burning in her emerald orbs. Naruto chuckled, as he responded, Kakashi and Erosenin, he said, drawing a giggle from Kushina. Minato called him that too, she said with a small smile. Naruto's smile never wavered, as he began telling her of his stories, and what had happened from the D-rank missions up until he met Haku and Zabuza, gaining his truth. He continued on, explaining the exams, and what had happened between his fights. He enjoyed the murderous expression she held when he mentioned Orochimaru had almost killed him. He continued on, explaining his meeting with Itachi and Kisame, and eventually reached how he beat Tsunade's bet, and almost killed Kabuto, ending when they came back to Konoha. He didn't want to tell about Sasuke's retrieval mission just yet, and the time was getting late, as they had been sitting in a park they had found while they were walking around. I think we need to get you something for tonight, he said, as he stood, and put his hand out to her. She smiled slightly, and took his hand, allowing him to pull her up, and standing right next to him. He smirked, as she put a hand on his chest to steady herself. She blushed slightly, and stepped back, as he simply turned away to hide his own small blush to lead her to the shop. Naruto and Kushina had been looking around the store for something for Kushina when Kushina suddenly disappeared behind a changing room curtain while telling Naruto, I'll be out in a minute. I want to see your full reaction to this. Naruto had rubbed his head in confusion. What did she expect him to do with this supposed outfit? Even if she was drop-dead gorgeous without needing it to be enhanced by any type of dress, he couldn't exactly tell her that, as she wasn't like him. Still believing that he was her Sochikun, he could tell she still thought that, as even though she had been acting friendly she was rather overprotective about certain things when he was talking. It was beginning to annoy him. He sighed, as he rubbed his head. This way of being friends with her wasn't working out exactly like he had planned. He would need to either push her away or simply find some way of stopping this attraction he was growing to her. He had a few girlfriends before, but no one could even compare to his mother in the beauty department. When he first saw her, he had an unnatural urge to ask the lady out on the spot, even noticing she was an intruder. Now that he found out she was his mother, he was trying to stop his feelings going beyond friendship, but his mind wouldn't stop their thoughts. It didn't help the few times Kyubi would break through his mental barriers. All he was screaming about was plowing his mom like no tomorrow. He looked up, as he heard the curtain being pushed aside, and his mind temporarily decided it would be better if it didn't function. His mouth dropped, and his eyes bugged out of his head as he stared into perfection. Kushina had pulled her hair up into a slightly messy bun that had crimson locks framing her creamy face. She had chosen a long dress that was held up with 2 shoulder pads that rested right on her shoulders to leave the creamy white skin of her neck and shoulders bare to the air. The color was a red that was a few shades lighter to her hair, accentuating her natural beauty perfectly. He noticed that the sides of the dress were slitted so when she walked you would get glimpses of her creamy white thighs. All in all, perfection. Kushina wondered if she had broken her Sochi when a word escaped his lips that had her giggling. Megami, he whispered, equating her beauty to a goddess. She was pleased, though she really shouldn't tease him. He was so fun to do so it was hard not to. Besides, she was still one smoking hot woman, and she would be damned if these women Naruto had informed her about would beat her in beauty. Even if she wasn't competing for someone's attention, it was nice to know he liked her appearance. She walked forward, and put her finger under his lip, closing his mouth, as she giggled. Thanks, she said. Naruto snapped out of his stupor, and grinned sheepishly. I might have to beat the guys off you with a stick tonight, Kushina-chan. Kushina grinned devilishly. With that, they were set for the night. Naruto paid for the dress and, after he went home, and changed, the two headed to the club to meet the Rookie 12. Kushina hooked her arm into Naruto's, as they walked. Naruto turned a questioning gaze to her, and she simply said, You're escorting a lady. You should always try to keep her close to Naruto-kun. She smiled up at him. Naruto shook his head, and further gripped her with his arm, drawing her in closer. Kushina blushed, but the two continued oblivious to the glares of the men and women lining the road, angry at them. The men for Naruto bagging a great-looking woman. The women at Kushina for taking Konoha's #1 bachelor. Naruto walked up with Kushina still linked to his arm, and smiled at the bouncer for the Club Dragon. "Evening, Jin, how's the crowd tonight?" he asked. The bouncer turned to him, and smiled brightly. "Great, Naruto." His eyes settled on Kushina. "Oh ho, finally decided to get a girlfriend, eh?" he said with a suggestive wink. "She looks like a keeper, Naruto. Don't you let any of your friends try to steal this one, okay?" He smiled at the two, as he let them into the club. As they passed, Naruto whispered so only Kushina and Jin could hear him. "You know those two didn't actually love me. Don't tease me like that, Jin. Though Kushina-chan here is a keeper, I promise you." He smiled, as he passed Jin. Kushina blushed, and could only smile at Jin's even brighter smile, as she disappeared into the club. Kushina leaned into Naruto, as the crowd pressed on them. "What was he talking about?" she asked, as she almost yelled in his ear. Naruto turned to her slightly, as he continued walking through the crowd. "These two ninjas who thought they loved me, but it was just a crush. I introduced them to some friends of mine, and they eventually cheated on me with my friends," he said. Kushina almost growled. Naruto smiled. "It didn't hurt. I only went out with them because they wouldn't leave me alone. I introduced them to their perfect matches, and when they left me, it was no hard feelings, as I knew it was coming," he said nonchalantly, leading to Kushina to stare at him gobsmacked. He chuckled slightly, closing her mouth much like she closed his earlier. By this time the two had reached a quieter part of the club, and Naruto spotted the almost full table of the Konoha 12 with the Sand Trio and their dates. He smiled, as he led Kushina toward them with a steady hand. He arrived, and looked around the table, as he introduced himself. "You guys will never guess what happened the other day," he said exuberantly. Around the table, people were seated with their dates. Shikamaru sat with Temari on his left. To their left was Ino and Chuji. They had gotten together after Naruto killed Madara, Ino finally admitting her long-held feelings for the big-boned and now muscled Akimichi. "That's Shikamaru and Temari. On their left is Ino and Chuji." Naruto began pointing out his friends, as they all stared at the beauty next to him. Next to them sat Sakura and Lee. Once Naruto had brought back Sasuke, Sakura had tried to make a relationship with him, even after confessing to Naruto, but it hadn't worked out, and Naruto would have nothing to do with her beyond friendship afterwards. Lee had accepted her after she truly repented, though Naruto didn't fully believe her. Next to them was Gaara with his fiancée Matsuri. Naruto smiled, as his fellow demon container finally found the love he deserved. "There is Lee and Sakura." Kushina frowned, which everyone took notice of. "Gaara and his fiancée Matsuri," he said, which prompted a very bright smile at Gaara, leaving Gaara to wonder why. Then there were 2 open seats, obviously for Naruto, and someone if he brought a date. Next to those seats were Hinata and Shino. That was an interesting pair. After Naruto had defeated Madara, he came back and told Hinata he liked her, but didn't love her, as he didn't know her. Before he could ask her out on a date to get to know her better, she had fled, and Naruto hadn't seen her again until she was wrapped onto Shino's arm like a scarf. He had congratulated them, and told Shino he would have to keep Hinata safe. Shino's response had been to let loose his bugs to show Naruto he would fight Naruto himself for her. Naruto smiled, bowed, and never bothered them again. They were great friends though. Next to them were Kiba and Shizen, an odd combination to say the least. Naruto had almost castrated Kiba when he found out his Nei-chan was pregnant with his first litter. Though Shizen had said they planned it, Naruto calmed down. After threatening him in the same manner as Shino, Kiba had earned Naruto's respect to keep Shizen safe. She was 3 months pregnant. Then there is Hinata and Shino. Next to them are Kiba and Shizen, whom I think you remember from Bachan, he said. Niji and Tenten sat next to them. The two had been going out since Naruto returned from his training trip, and were planning their marriage. A few months ago the Hyuga Council tried to marry Niji off to another Hyuga. Tenten had been so distraught that she had run from Niji when she found out, and stumbled across Naruto training. After coaxing the story from her, Naruto had marched to the Hyuga Council, and blown the doors down, his old loud personality coming back from his younger days. As he protected his friend's happiness, he had threatened the Hyuga Council with fighting him in order to force Niji to leave Tenten. The council had tried to outmaneuver Naruto in politics, but he simply said, "I don't care. If you force this marriage on Niji, I will kill you. Now, you have 2 days to tell Niji he is engaged to Tenten Higurashi, or you will find Gamabunta sitting on your manor." He had left the council with pasty faces. Not even 5 hours later Tenten had rushed to Naruto's apartment, and showed him the huge ring Niji got her. He smiled, and said, "Good for you." She kissed him on the cheek, and whispered, "Thank you," before running back to Niji, and they disappeared for the next 3 days. Then Niji and Tenten. "You remember them from today's trip," he said. Kankuro was dating some high-level kunoichi from Suna for the betterment of the Kazekage's bloodline. Finally, was Sasuke. He had reformed slightly. Though he was still arrogant, he was at least tolerable. He was only let back in on Naruto's behalf when Tsunade said he was looking to leave again. His newfound somewhat friendship with the rookie 12 had led to him staying, and he now had 4 children with his 2 wives, Karen and Tayuya, who had both shown up a few weeks after Sasuke had returned. Both of his wives were sitting next to him. Then Kankuro, Sasuke, Karen, and Tayuya. He finished with his introductions. Sakura was the first to find her voice, jealousy tinting her voice. Though she didn't really love Naruto, she still held feelings for the blonde enigma. "Naruto, who is that?" she asked, as the rest of the table all nodded their heads. Naruto smiled. "This," he said, as he pushed Kushina forward, "is my long-lost cousin Kushina Uzumaki," he said with a flourish of his hand. Kushina turned a questioning gaze to him. As he presented her, "Cousin?" she asked. "What? You look too young to be my mother. Besides, I don't want them grilling you about your past just yet," he responded quietly so only she could hear. Kushina nodded, and turned back around, giving them a slight bow. "It is a pleasure to meet you," she said. Everyone, but Shizen, seemed to respond. Naruto, and Kushina sat down with Naruto pulling the chair out for her, and her smiling coyly at him, something none of them missed. He sat down, and looked at his friends. "What are you all staring at?" he asked with laughter in his voice, as he knew they were entranced with Kushina. "When did you meet Naruto?" Shikamaru asked. "Yesterday," he replied nonchalantly. "She came to Konoha once she heard my name, and saw Bachan. I spent the whole day with her today. Turns out she is actually a cousin of mine," he said. Hinata spoke up. "Then you must know who his parents are, Kushina-san." Kushina shuffled in her seat, as Naruto rubbed his head sheepishly. "I already know who my parents are. I just haven't told you cause it isn't time. Don't worry, it will be out soon." The table nodded, and the conversations broke into smaller parts. Sijin still stared at Kushina, as if she saw someone rise from the grave. Kiba was starting to get worried. "Where have you been to Kushina-san?" Gaara asked in an impassive tone, curious about a relation to his surrogate brother. "Around the world, Gaara. Or should I say Kazekage-sama?" she said with mirth twinkling in her eyes. Gaara simply closed his eyes. Naruto chuckled. "I think you embarrassed him," he said. "Not as embarrassed as I can make you," she responded with her normal exuberance coming to the surface, as she was finally not the center of attention. Unknown to her, everyone was still listening into their conversation, as almost all talking stopped when Naruto's eyes gained the same mirthful look hers did. All of them cringed, as they saw that spark in their youth, before Naruto played a prank on someone. "Try me," he said. "What's your favorite Sag's position?" she asked. Naruto blushed, but didn't miss a beat. "After last night, you have to ask," he responded. Kushina's blush was glowing, as Hinata, Ino, and Temari all held blushes. Shizen was still staring somehow, and Sakura looked disgusted. The clans would breed cousins, so they understood that, and accepted it, as ninja life. If Naruto did have Sags with his cousin, then it wasn't really too abnormal. However, with the way they were talking, it was doubtful. Besides, Naruto didn't take someone to bed the first night he met them. "Well, I was doing most of the work. I couldn't tell what you liked best, as you were a bit too quick," she said. Naruto's face glowed in anger. "Not going by the screams I heard. You were clenching so tight it was hard to hold on," he responded. "Man whore," she replied. "Slut," he said. Both of them glared, as the table stared at them like they were nuts. Suddenly, they both burst out laughing. "Oh, Kami, that was beautiful," Naruto said, as he wiped a tear from his eye. "I haven't had fun like that in a long while, Naruto-kun," Kushina said. "Naruto-kun, is it?" Ino said with a suggestive wriggle of an eyebrow. "Kushina-chan can call me anything she likes, just as I can do the same, isn't that right, Kushi-chan?" he said, as he rubbed his nose into her cheek, making her smirk, as he continued their little game of teasing each other. Sakura suddenly slammed her fist down on the table. "That's disgusting, stop that," she said, as she glared at the two. The whole table turned to her, even Shizen, as they all popped question marks above their heads. "What's disgusting?" Shino asked with curiosity. Being around Hinata had led to him losing some of his impassivity. He would occasionally show emotion now. "That," Sakura said while pointing at Naruto, and Kushina cuddling. Naruto turned his head behind him. "What? I don't see anything," he said. The table sweat dropped, as Naruto smirked where only Kushina could see it. "You," Sakura said, as her old screeching voice came back from her younger years. "You're making it sound like you freaked, or something. Your cousins, that's disgusting," she said. Hinata turned to Sakura. "You're joking, right?" Just as Hinata had affected Shino, Shino had affected Hinata. She could be so sarcastic sometimes. When Sakura's glare didn't lessen, she sighed, That is nothing abnormal in our life, Sakura, she said. Sakura turned an incredulous eye on Hinata. Think about it, she said. How exactly could you have clans without inbreeding to some degree? Without it, clans would fade from lack of purity. That is nothing different with the two of them. Though I doubt they actually did it, she said. Sakura's gaze softened slightly, but she still looked slightly disgusted. That's just wrong, she said, as she sat back down and clung to Lee. The rest of the table sighed. But Shizen suddenly spoke up. For cousins, it is okay in clans though, she said. Naruto's eyes widened, and he started to speak. Shizen Nichidan dash. But even for clans, mothers and sons aren't allowed, she said, drawing confused looks from everyone, but Naruto and Kushina. Kushina looked down and pushed away from Naruto. Naruto's heart clenched. He liked being close to her, even if it was just teasing. He rounded on Shizen. What are you saying? He asked in a dangerous tone, causing them to all look at him. Shizen met his gaze. I know who Kushina is, Naruto. I was with Tsunade-sama when she left. Don't try to lie to me, she said. Naruto scoffed. You didn't think there was a reason I was keeping that away from them? He said, as they all stared at him in shock, going back and forth from Kushina's downward gaze and Naruto's burning blue orbs. Where was Naruto? Why are you doing stuff like that? She is supposed to be dead, she said with no small amount of force behind her voice. She was pissed, as she believed Kushina abandoned Naruto. Naruto turned to Kushina. Would you like to tell her, or should I? He asked quietly. Kushina simply put a hand on his leg under the table. No one saw her hand move, but Naruto turned back to Shizen and his table of friends. This is not my cousin, she is my mother, he said, drawing gasps from everyone. Many started to glare at Kushina. Naruto's ki filled the area, as he glared at them all, drawing Kushina's gaze to his eyes full of blazing determination. She was tricked on the day of my birth, and she has not been back here since. I have heard her full story, and forgiven her. If my actions weren't enough evidence, I hold no grudge towards her, and neither should any of you. Her actions were not the best, but understandable considering her circumstances. Do not hold this against her. Try to get to know her like I am, he said, as his voice softened slightly when he looked down at her emerald orbs full of thanks. Most everyone nodded, though Shizen still glared at Kushina. Naruto turned the full force of his ki on her, causing Kiba to growl slightly. Stop it, Shizen, he said, dropping her honorific. I have dealt with it, and it is none of your concern. If you wish, the full story lies with Bachan, and she might tell you. Though if you continue glaring at Kushina-chan like that, I might have to have her put a restraining order on you, he threatened. Shizen's eyes showed her shock, as she stared into Naruto's eyes. Kushina-chan? Temari questioned. This brought everyone out of their stunned silence to realize he had never answered their second question. Naruto turned to Temari. Yes, so, he said, as Kushina was now looking forward with steel in her eyes. She drew strength from Naruto defending her. It showed he truly forgave her, and was willing to work past it. You don't call your cousin by their name, Naruto, she replied. Naruto shrugged. I don't recognize her as my mother, he said to the shock of the gathering. What do you mean by that? Kiba shouted. What he means, Kushina said for the first time since the argument started, is that he offered me two choices when he met me last night. Her gaze panned around the table, taking in many curious glances. After explaining to him my situation, he offered for me to continue trying to be his mother, and lose him, as he would push me away, she said with sadness in her voice, or become his friend, and build a relationship this way. Since I am here, you can see what route I chose, she said. That's insane, Naruto Baka, Ino said with vehemence. Is it? He started coldly, making everyone flinch. You all know what my childhood was like. I had no one to raise me, no one tucked me in at night, and no one taught me anything I know. I was my own parent. I will not recognize someone who has not been here my whole life as my mother simply because she shares my. How would you like it if some stranger just came up to you now and told you that you should listen to them because they were related to you? He asked. The whole table looked down, but Kankuro spoke up. She is still your mother, he said. Naruto turned to him. I acknowledge she gave birth to me, but that is it. I do not call anyone Ka-san or Tu-san, as you all once did. I was alone from my first birthday until my training trip. Do not presume that my own views are the same as yours. Naruto turned to Kushina. Do you believe I should immediately start listening to you because you suddenly showed up after 18 years of absence, and say you are the person who gave me life? Yesterday Kushina would have said yes immediately. After talking with him today, and seeing how mature he was, she hesitantly replied, no. I have spent the entire day with you. You don't need a mother. At this point in life, all parents are just friends to their children anyways, she said. Naruto turned back to his friends. I may seem uncaring, but I was well within my rights to ignore her. This is still a relationship, even if it is different from the norm. Then again, my life has never been normal, he said as he sat back. That still doesn't explain how you could flirt with her like that, Shizen was accused. Naruto sighed. as he looked sideways at Kushina. "You're not going to like this," he whispered. Kushina stiffened even more as Naruto spoke. "No, I suppose it doesn't, but do you know what I see when I look at Kushina-chan?" The group looked confused. "I do not see a mother, or someone who you would label as untouchable," he said. "Huh," Kiba said. "An untouchable Kiba. To you, an untouchable would be Hana or Tsum, someone you wouldn't even think of doing something perverted with," he said, explaining his definition. "When you were all born, you knew your parents from the start. While you were growing up, you were shown who it was okay to date, or show intimate gestures with. You have your own standards of who you would date, who you would be intimate with, and who you would avoid like the plague to not date." "Right?" he asked, gaining nods from everyone. "I do not have an untouchable," he said. "For so long, I have craved attention. I would take it from anyone. I am well aware of this fact. That is the reason I avoid getting attached to anyone, because it would be easy to manipulate me. Even if Bachan showed interest in me, I would return the gesture, as she is one of my precious people. The only thing that would cause me to turn you down was if I didn't know you or you were cheating on someone," he said. "When I look at Kushina-chan, I do not see a mother. I see the woman who gave birth to me, a woman with fiery red hair, which I love, emerald green eyes, a body like a goddess, and a sense of humor much like my own. I have no problems admitting to myself I would easily give in to her if she wished to have an intimate relationship despite our past," he said to more gasp. "But let me ask you this, what exactly makes a person untouchable?" he said. Shocked looks were being pointed at him, and Naruto continued on, knowing he needed to explain this. "Is it just because they carry the same blood, or is it because of something else?" "Tenten, you were adopted, right?" he asked. Tenten nodded. "So you are not related to your father by anything other than a piece of paper that says you are his daughter, correct?" he asked. Again Tenten nodded. "Then what stops you from seeing him in a romantic light?" he asked, drawing understanding from a few of the people around him, though many were still disgusted. "I am not going to excuse my actions. I am simply trying to show you where I am coming from. I was never taught who it was okay to love, and not to love. I love Kushina just as I love the rest of you, but that does not mean I am going to screw everyone here simply because of that. Whether I'm sick in the head or not, it doesn't matter, because that is just the way I am, and the way I have raised myself," he said, as he finished his explanation. He turned back to look at Kushina, who had an odd expression on her face. Naruto sighed. This was not going to end well for him. "That's disgusting," Sakura finally said. Ino, Lee, Kiba, and Shizen all nodded their heads. Sasuke glared at Naruto, as did his brides. All of them stood, and left the table, leaving Naruto to look down. "I expected that. So what do the rest of you say?" he asked. "I think that you're probably screwed up in the head," Shikamaru said, "but your logic is sound, and the way you presented it actually makes sense. I can see how you think of Naruto, though I wish you wouldn't. I can understand, and that leads me to empathizing with you. You're still a friend of mine. We all have our own quirks anyways," he said, as the rest of the table nodded. "I want to stay with Naruto, but Ino is going to get really pissed anyway. I'll talk to you later, man," Chuji said, as the strong man stood, and followed his girlfriend out the bar. Naruto turned to Kushina, who looked back at him with clouded eyes. He sighed. "Let's get you home. I think you have taken all of my convoluted thought processes you can handle, and we didn't even get a drink," he said. Kushina nodded, and Naruto shunshined them to her apartment. Naruto let go of Kushina at the door, and said, "I'm sorry if that puts you in an awkward position, but that is the way I see it," he said while looking at her clouded eyes. "If you don't wish to stay near me because of it, I will understand." A look of hurt flashed across his face, but Kushina was too confused to notice. "Good night, Kushina-chan. I really enjoyed our day together," he said, as he leaned in, and kissed her on the cheek before he shined back to his own house. Naruto sighed, as he walked into his house. "Damn it!" he cried, as his door shut, locking him inside. "Even if I saw her like that, it doesn't mean I wanted her to know." He was pissed that he had to defend himself and Kushina when all they had been doing was teasing each other. He knew the others would see it as wrong, but he had no such inhibitions. The fact she was one of the only women who had stayed near him without ulterior motives was a huge plus. And even though he had only known her for the equivalent of a day, it felt like she had been around much longer. "Wanted who knows what brat," a female voice said, as Naruto's sensei finally kicked in. He sighed, as he registered 2 presences in his house. Naruto rubbed his head sheepishly, as he said, "Watch it, Bachan, Ero-senin. I just had an interesting night at the club with Kushina-chan." Tsunade and Jiraiya both nodded their heads. Naruto raised an eyebrow. "Why didn't you tell me you are disgusted or something like my friends?" he asked immediately. Tsunade and Jiraiya both sighed, but smiled sadly. "It is partly our fault you are like that. They were his godparents." Naruto nodded. "We don't really have a problem with it. During the initial stages of our life, there was a lot more incest because of the small amount of clan members than there is in these days. Incest was just another way for some people to have fun. Besides, if Kushi-chan allows you to call her that, then there isn't a problem, is there? Tsunade said. Naruto blushed. Hee, what could be the more perfect story? Mother and son reunited after 18 years, Jiraiya said with a perverted leer. They shared a night of passion, he said, as he was pummeled into the ground by his beloved Tsunade's punch. Tsunade smiled at him. You remember what Kushina did the time you caught her naked? She asked sweetly. Jiraiya paled, and he looked at Naruto to find him glaring at him. He was white, as a ghost. He knew Naruto could beat his ass from here until Sunday. He smiled apologetically. Okay, no stories about you. He waved his hand placatingly. Both held smirks of satisfaction. Anyways, we just wanted to make sure you were okay, Tsunade said, as she looked at Naruto. Naruto sighed, and shook his head. I was until Shizen went, and blurted out something I was obviously trying to hide so my friends would get to know her without any prejudice, he said. Tsunade shook her head. She was always so level-headed. Kiba must have had that effect on her, she said. I'll have a talk with her. Naruto shook his head. No, don't even tell her the story. If she wishes to be prejudiced against Kushina, then she is no better than the villagers were like in my youth, he said. That's pretty harsh, Naruto, though it is a mature way of dealing with it. You force her to talk to you or Kushina to get past her problems, thus keeping other conflicts from occurring, Jiraiya said. Naruto nodded. If that is all, I think I am going to go to bed, he said, as he began to walk inside. Wait, how did you know what happened at the club? He asked. Tsunade smirked. Being Hokage has its advantages. And you are wonderful spies on my Ototo, she said. Naruto smiled slightly. Good night, Bachan Erosenin. The two smiled at each other before Tsunade linked her arm with Jiraiya's. She whispered into his ear, and the two suddenly disappeared off the grounds. Naruto chuckled as he closed his door. Naruto went to bed wondering what Kushina's actions would be the next day. Kushina turned around and walked into her apartment. Her mind clouded with everything Naruto had said and confessed to. Her mind was whirling with the stories he had woven, and the harshness of his childhood to his first ever C rank turning into an A rank. How screwed up the exams were, and the invasion with him defeating a who transformed into his own demon. She walked straight into her room and looked at her bed. How he had left Konoha with Jiraiya just to be attacked by Itachi Uchiha and Kisame Hashigaki, two of the strongest shinobi of their time. Even she would have shied away from them. He had miraculously survived and headed on to meet Tsunade, and win a bet with her to learn a technique his father took 3 years to master in a total of 3 weeks. She took her shoes off. She was surprised at his luck. He had managed to survive 2 attacks from the traitorous Orochimaru, and attacks from Itachi and Kisame. All dangerous shinobi would be hard-pressed to fight even with her considerable skills. He was a survivor. But the fact that most took up her concentration was what he just admitted to. She allowed her body to simply fall onto her bed, still completely clothed, as she let her face bury into her pillows, her mind replaying the club scene. She is just a woman with fiery red hair, which I love, a part of her that she had hated until Minato had rescued her, and he immediately fell in love with it. With the body of a goddess, and a sense of humor like my own, she blushed red, as she heard him equate her to a goddess yet again. This time though, she knew it was anything but him just trying to flatter her, as a friend. Those were his actual feelings on her. It gave her a warm feeling, much like earlier when he would tease her, that he could be so honest, and that he saw her like that. She had not wanted a male companion since she left Konoha, but she enjoyed being complimented, especially by such a handsome man as him. Something she could finally admit because of his speech. Then the ultimate question, would she push him away from his views? She turned to Lei on her side, as she pondered this. She was so dead set on being his mother that she hadn't seen anything past him being her son when she met him. She had gotten a glimpse of his body this morning, and she had been hard-pressed to keep herself from trying to flirt with him. Though she might have done so, she had been doing it as harmless teasing that she meant not to go any farther. Obviously, he did not see it that way. She thought back to the days she had spent with him. When he would make a joke during his stories, she would giggle. When he would tease her, she would tease him back. She had easily fallen back into her old self while around him, her previous 18 years of moping all but being obliterated by his presence. She smiled as she thought of how vehemently he defended her in the club. She frowned as she thought of his views on intimacy, though. That was something she had not expected. He was so well-rounded in his maturity, she had expected him to be normal. But like he said, he was anything but normal. If that was his one quirk, would she condemn him for it, and wind up losing her only connection to her family because of it? She sighed as she thought of it. She didn't know. Kushina turned over and fell asleep, as thoughts of Naruto whirled in her head. A figure snuck through Naruto's house. The darkness of the house covered the figure, as it quietly opened the door to Naruto's room. The figure spied Naruto laying on his back, as his steady breathing was indicated by the rise and fall of his bare chest. His legs were tangled up in some sheets, as it was obvious he had a restless night. If you could tell anything about the figure, you could see the grin on its face. The figure creeped past the bed, and to the opposite side of the bedroom. The figure smirked, as it grabbed the curtains and flung them wide, letting the bright sun into the room. Naruto groaned, as his arm came up, and blocked his eyes from the dastardly sun rays. Oof, Naruto said, as a weight settled on his hips. He squinted, as his eyes adjusted to the bright rays. Ohio Naruto-kun, Kushina's voice chirped, as she looked down on him from her position straddling his hips. She was wearing the same form-fitting outfit as yesterday morning. His eyes bugged out, as Kushina leaned down and pressed her impressive bust against his bare chest. I thought about what you said last night, she said with a husky voice. Naruto's eyes started to glaze over, and she trailed off, as her lips hovered over his own. He could feel her breath upon him, as she breathed. He took a shuddering breath, as he felt his member harden from her position, and the tone of her voice, and he asked with anticipation in his voice. Kushina suddenly giggled. What Naruto didn't see was the massive blush that spread across her face, as she felt his erection rub against her. Big dot, she thought. She returned her attention to Naruto. Someone is getting ahead of themselves, she said in the same husky tone, as she twisted her hips rubbing against the head of his member. Naruto's breath hitched, and he asked with anticipation and frustration in his voice, and she suddenly rolled off him, as she giggled like a madwoman. Oh, you should see the look on your face, she said, as Naruto's lustful look turned to one of confusion. This only made Kushina's giggle turn into full-blown laughter. A few moments later Naruto's look turned to anger. You were toying with me, he accused. Kushina shook her head, and settled down enough to talk. Yes, I was, she said with a cheeky grin, but I did think about what you said last night. She turned her head to the side, as she looked him directly in the eyes. I can accept that you see me as a woman, and not your mother, for now, she admitted, though I hope you do eventually come to see me as your mother. I realize that it might not ever happen. Naruto could see the steel in her eyes. As long as you don't take anything too far, she said, I don't mind continuing our relationship just like yesterday, even including the teasing, she said with her emerald orbs twinkling with mischief. I have never had as much fun in my life, she said happily. Naruto smiled, and suddenly pounced on her. Kushina pouted cutely. Naruto chuckled. Seriously, don't do that again. It is hard enough to control myself without having you on top of me, and if Kyuubi manages to break through and yell at me, I don't know if I could stop my instincts, he admitted. One downside to being his container, I am much more instinctual than a normal person, he said. Kushina nodded, and Naruto smiled at her. Then let's go out and talk some more, or would you rather I cook for you, and we spend the day here, he offered. Kushina cocked her head to the side. You can cook, she asked. Naruto smiled. Here it is then. The rest of the day rushed by, as they both started to get to know each other better. Naruto skipped his training trip and the Sasuke retrieval mission, and started his tales on his rescuing of Gaara. Kushina explained what his father had been like and the last war. Time skipped 2 months. Naruto sighed, as he looked at Tsunade. A B rank? He asked. Tsunade nodded. Don't start complaining, brat. Your partner will be Kushi-chan, she said, as she waved at Kushina. Kushina smiled at him. Well, at least it won't be boring, he said, as he smirked at Kushina. The two had grown very close in 2 months. Naruto was set to take the Hokage hat in a few more months, and he had taken every spare moment he had to get to know Kushina. They teased each other mercilessly, to the chagrin of most of their friends, but almost all of them had accepted his awkward relationship. Sakura, Lee, and Ino were the only ones who were adamantly refusing to even be seen with them. Kushina herself had found some old friends of hers, Sarutobi Kurenai, Yumino Anko, and Gekko Yugao. Yes, they are all married at this point. Asuma and Hade did not die. They had been surprised when she was alive. She had been a close confidant of the three, and they had been sad when they heard of her death. Naruto had been happy when she found some girlfriends though. The three didn't really like his relationship, but they were good friends with the both of them. Why a B rank though? He asked. Tsunade's eyes started to twitch. Brat, read the damn mission profile, and you will see why I let you have this one, and not a S rank, she said. Naruto shrugged, and opened the scroll, and started to read it. Tsunade's face became grim, and Kushina started to frown, as Naruto's rage became more palpable each second he read the scroll. When he reached the end, his eyes snapped to Tsunade. I accept, Hokage-sama, surprising even Tsunade, as he actually called her by her title. How long have they been in business? He asked. 1 month. I only just found their location, she answered. They travel about 3 days from here. Naruto's blue orbs were cold as ice, as Kushina tried to figure out what was wrong. They will be dead in a day, Bachan, he stated with absolute certainty in his voice. Naruto is reasonable, she said. No, those guys are scum. I won't allow them to live any longer. I will reverse summon Kushina-chan in a few hours. Brief her, please. With that, Naruto was gone. He didn't disappear in a flash or a blur. He was simply not there any longer, as his harsh training gave him the ability to move so fast he was unseeable. Tsunade sighed. Kushina turned to Tsunade. What the hell type of mission did you give him? She asked. Tsunade's face turned grim. As she said, there is a cell of bandits that has been operating under the radar for the past month that is led by a doctor. A particularly sick doctor that is as smart as he is insane, she said. Kushina's eyes were locked on Tsunade. He apparently managed to make some drug that is, in essence, a mind rape drug, she said with disgust in her voice. Kushina's eyes narrowed. When injected, the drug basically wipes the person out, and leaves them a complete blank state, allowing the person who injected it to turn the person into anything they want. You can imagine what bandits use this for, she said with pure hate in her voice. Sag slaves? Kushina growled out, as Tsunade nodded. I finally managed to track them down. I'm sending Naruto, and yourself, because Naruto has no mercy for rapists, and you will probably be the only one who will be able to calm him down once he is done destroying the camp. You can help, but just please do not get injected with anything in that psycho's camp, she warned. Kushina nodded. Dismissed. Get ready for his summons in a few hours, Tsunade said to Kushina's nod. Time skip. Naruto's chakra disappeared back into him as he finished killing off that sick of a doctor. The bastard had even tried to improve on his perfect drug so that it would actually just lock the woman away in a cage within their own minds, and they would still be conscious of what was happening to their own bodies. Naruto had been in such a rage that he had used the Kyuubi's chakra for the first time since Madara's fight. Kid, you have finally broken down the seal enough for me to talk to you completely. Good job. The voice of the Kyuubi no Kitsune sounded in his mind. Naruto grit his teeth. Shut up, you baka Kitsune, he thought back. Hey, don't be yelling at me. It's you humans who are the real demons here, kid. Without those bastards you keep killing, you would never have even used my. The great Kitsune shot back. Naruto hung his head. Besides, shouldn't you be summoning that hot piece of ass that is your mother? It reminded Naruto of Kushina. Oh crap, Naruto said with his eyes widening. I forgot to summon her. She is gonna be so pissed, he said while grabbing his head in anguish. Ha, you can fight anyone off, but when it comes to your precious peoples you're as docile as a rabbit, Kyuubi remarked. Naruto narrowed his eyes. You know, I can think of a few things to conjure up in my mind that might shut your ass up, he said. Kyuubi laughs maliciously. Try me. It said. Naruto smiled mischievously. The next thing he heard was, Kit, stop it. Kit, get rid of it. It's too damn fluffy and cute. Get rid of it, Kyuubi bellowed. Naruto let out a content sigh, and the image of multiplying puppies was removed from his mindscape. Now be quiet, as I summon her, he said. All he received was silence. Naruto sighed, and got ready to be beaten the crap out of, as he ran through some hand signs, and slammed his hand on the ground. Reverse summoning, he said, and with a poof of smoke Kushina appeared in that same form-fitting outfit she liked to wear when she came over to just spend the day at his house. Kushina's eyes panned around, and took in the destruction of the camp. You already killed them all, didn't you? She deadpanned, as Naruto scratched the back of his neck sheepishly. No, he said hesitantly. God damn it, Naruto-kun, now what am I supposed to do with these? She asked, as she pulled some high-grade explosive tags from somewhere. Naruto laughed warily. Blow up the laboratory so no one can get his research? He offered helpfully. Kushina turned a deadpan look at him, as she said, You had that thought out, didn't you? She accused. Naruto turned around, and started to walk away whistling a tune. No, I didn't, he said. Naruto-kun, I think we are going to have a problem, Kushina said, as he walked away. Naruto turned back around with a question on his lips until he felt her shin behind him, and pulled something out of his back. I think they injected you with something. It says, Experiment 914, she said, as she presented the syringe to Naruto. Well, I think we should see what it is even if Kyuubi can purge it of my system, Naruto said. Naruto and Kushina walked into the building Naruto had been standing in front of. The two walked down a few hallways ending in a huge room with a large metallic table sitting in the middle of it. There were jars and containers of odd liquids along with multiple syringes. Naruto walked over to a certain table where a particularly large bloodstain was, and started to shuffle through the papers located there. Kushina walked up next to him. The doctor? She asked quietly, as he shuffled through papers. Yeah, he was trying to improve on his drug, Naruto replied with cold fury. He felt Kushina turn and glare at the bloodstain almost as if she wished he would get back together in order for her to blow him to hell again. I'm going to place these tags, Kushina said, as she walked away from him. Naruto nodded, and shuffled his feet, as he felt it get a bit hotter in the lab. Naruto continued going through the mountains of papers here. He sighed, as he read about more and more depraved experiments this man had done. He was almost as sick as Orochimaru. He had experiments on grafting animals into humans so that the human would gain more speed or better muscles. Experiments that ruined a person's mind break because he was trying to create a super soldier that would be able to best an entire army. Naruto chuckled as he thought of that. He was capable of doing such a thing. He pulled on his collar, letting some of his accumulated body heat free from his shirt. "Ah, here it is," Naruto said, as he pulled a paper with the heading Experiment 914 from the pile of papers. "Let's see. Initial testing failed." "Well, that's good. But what is it supposed to do?" Objective. Attempts to seize sexual drive. What? Guess it is good it failed. "I wonder why though," Naruto said, as he read further. Testing was a failure. Instead the drug seems to Naruto trailed off. "Kyubi, you big fur ball, flush my system now," Naruto mentally screamed, as he grabbed his jacket and removed it. "Ha ha ha, sweet justice." "No way in hell, Kit, this is going to be one hell of a show," Kyubi replied, as he enjoyed the panic his host was exhibiting. Kushina walked back into the room, and was looking around, as she said, "Ready to go?" Then her eyes met Naruto. "Are you alright?" Naruto turned, and nodded at her. "I'm fine with Kyubi acting up a bit. I found out what the drug is supposed to do," he said. Kushina held her hand out for the paper in his hand. "What does it do?" she asked. Naruto incinerated the paper in his hand. "Something that I am glad I have Kyubi in my system for. Let's leave it at that," he said with a shudder. Kushina nodded after seeing him shudder. What she didn't know was that the shudder was from another source. "Let's go," Naruto said, and brushed past her. He shuddered again. "Ha ha ha." Kyubi laughed in his mind. Kushina nodded, and said a few explosive tags in the lab before following him out of the compound again. Once the two reached the outside, they both jumped straight into the trees, and headed out to Konoha. About 2 minutes later, Kushina held up a hand sign, and said Katsu. An enormous explosion signified the destruction of the awful base of depravity. Time skip 1 day. Naruto shuddered again, as he could feel the drug taking effect. Damn it all, freaking drug, freaking Kyubi. He thought to himself. If you would have just listened to me last night, then you wouldn't be having this problem. Though continue trying to resist, you know you will eventually give in. Kyubi taunted from behind his cage. "Naruto-kun?" he heard Kushina say from behind him. He stopped on a branch, and turned around to see her. "Yes?" he asked with a small smile. Kushina landed next to him, and walked up to him. Naruto stiffened, as his enhanced senses were assaulted by her presence. He took a deep sniff of the air, taking in the musty smell of the forest with the trees and dirt surrounding them. This was overpowered, though, by Kushina's smell of butternut cream, a sweet smell that brought his mouth to water. His breath hitched as she drew closer, and he could feel the heat coming off of her body from their traveling today. It was about mid-afternoon. He heard each step she took, as a thundering crash, as if she were a giant stepping on the ground. Then her hand reached out, and laid upon his head. Her skin was as soft and perfect as he remembered from each time he touched it. He shuddered again, as she leaned forward, and pressed her forehead to his. "You're burning up, Naruto-kun." "What's wrong?" she asked with concern, as his senses went haywire with each breath she breathed straight into his nostrils. Her scent was overpowering now. "And nothing. Just the drug being flushed from my system," he said, as he took a shaky step away from her. Kushina's eyes narrowed. "There is a town right over there," she said, as she pointed through a few trees. "We are going to go get a room, and you are going to rest until that drug is out of your system." Naruto shook his head. "It would be better to go back," he started, only to be cut off. "We are going to get a room in Naruto-kun," she stated in a tone that brokered no arguing. Naruto sighed, and allowed her to lead the way, as he jumped off after her. It took only a few minutes for the two to reach the outskirts. Naruto was breathing a bit heavier, as he walked behind Kushina. He clamped a hand over his nose so he couldn't breathe in her scent, and allowed his eyes to close, leading himself completely with his hearing and sensing chakra. He kept repeating in his mind, "Just keep in mind she is a precious person." The two entered a nice hotel. Kushina walked up to the counter with Naruto still behind her, and spoke to the man behind the counter. "1 room please," she said. Naruto's eyes shot open. 2 rooms. He said his hand came from his nose so he would sound normal, though only Kushina caught the note of something in his voice. She narrowed her eyes as she looked at him. 1 room. "I won't leave you alone in your state," she said. Naruto shook his head. 2 rooms, he insisted. Kushina glared at him. "Is there something you're not telling me?" she asked, as she looked him over, taking in his exaggerated breathing along with his hunched shoulders. The man behind the counter said, "There is currently only 1 room available, sir. So if you wish to stay in a room with the lady, then you will have to find another hotel," he said, looking at Naruto. He turned to Kushina, and added with a bit of a leer, "The only room left is the king's suite, which is quite expensive." Naruto growled at the man. "We will take it, and you will keep your leers to yourself, or you will find yourself missing something important to every man," he hissed out. Kushina's eyes widened as she heard Naruto defend her without her even seeing the man's leer. They widened further, as she saw Naruto's eyes. The man turned to Naruto with a sneer, but was stopped cold, as he was faced, not with Naruto's blue eyes, but Kyuubi's malignant blood red. He took Naruto's credit card, and handed the key over to him without a sound. All of this happened within seconds, and Naruto had already swept away from Kushina, and the man in a hurry. As he walked to the stairs, Kushina suddenly regained her senses and, with a backwards glare at the pervert, she followed Naruto to their room. That was the perfect kit, Kyuubi roared in his head. Your fiery-haired mate was so stunned. That was so satisfying, Kyuubi said, as he finally saw the fear, his eyes transfixed into others. Strangely enough, he knew Kushina wasn't afraid of those eyes. Mate, he thought back to the great Kitsune. Kyuubi scoffed, don't you try to lie to me, you blonde-haired bastard. She may be your birth mother, but you see her as your mate. No one else has caught your eye, and I must say even, as an opposite species, I find her attractive. The great Kitsune admitted. Naruto stopped, as his mind whirled. What? He thought in a rage. You're only proving it, Kit. Stop trying to fight what that drug is doing. You won't ever make a move without it, and I won't have you dying a virgin. So I am not purging your system, he said, as he heard Kyuubi curl up. This is your chance. It said before he felt his connection cut with him, and he realized he was in front of his room. Naruto sighed, and took a deep breath. He stiffened, as Kushina's scent invaded his nose. He reached forward, and shakily unlocked the door. He walked into the room, and noticed it was pretty well furnished, but he was too focused on the woman behind him. Her very presence overshadows everything else. Kushina walked past him, and jumped onto the bed acting a little like a kid, as she twisted, and turned on top of the sheets, not helping Naruto at all. He watched, as her muscles flexed and moved her body in interesting ways before she propped herself up on one elbow laying on her side, as her other hand lay along the top of her body giving off a sexy pose. This is pretty nice. But are you going to tell me what's going on with Naruto-kun? She asked. Naruto's face contorted, as he felt a particularly large jolt come from his body, as he took in her pose. He shuddered, and looked at Kushina. I need a bath. A cold bath, he muttered the last part under his breath. He brushed past the bed, and shed all, but his pants, and underwear, as he walked across the room, and entered the bathroom. He turned the cold water on full, and let the bath fill, as he took his pants and boxers off his erect member, slapping up, as he pulled his boxers down. He groaned, as he felt it pulsing heavily, wanting relief. As soon as the tub was filled, he jumped into it, and let out a grunt, as the freezing cold waters washed over his heated body. He laid his head back, and relaxed for a few moments before he felt his erection start to throb painfully. He grunted, and leaned down so his head was right by the water. He suddenly plunged his head into the water, and screamed out, allowing the bubbles to muffle his screaming. Naruto leaned back up, and sighed, as he felt his body stay heated despite the water's effects. He leaned back again, and was suddenly on his feet, as he heard the door to the bedroom crash inwards. Naruto-kun, what was that screaming? Kushina said, as she looked at his face. Naruto's body shuddered again, as he looked at Kushina in her attire. She had not changed out of that form-fitting uniform, but he sighed, as he realized nothing was wrong. Kushina herself suddenly noticed something that was not right. She waved her hand at Naruto's erection. Is this what has been bothering you? She asked. Naruto suddenly plunged back into the freezing cold water, and shook his head saying he didn't want to talk about it. Kushina sighed. This is the drug, isn't it? She guessed. Naruto's silence was all her answer. Why doesn't the Kyuubi flush it? She asked curiously. Naruto looked down, but said, it was supposed to make the injected sterile, but it seems it does the opposite, making the person's libido go insane. He explained. Kyuubi won't flush it because Naruto trailed off, not wanting to lie to her, but not wanting her to know the truth either. Because? Kushina questioned. Naruto mumbled something under his breath about stupid fox Biju before raising his voice. He sees you, as my mate, and sees nothing wrong with the two of us doing that, he said. Kushina's blank face was his answer. He stared at her for a few more moments until she asked in an emotionless tone, what will happen if you don't know? Naruto flushed, but said, it will fade in a few days, he said. Kushina nodded, and closed the door again before he heard her walking away, and sitting on the bed. He sighed. Baka Erokitsun, head hot, as he laid back in his cold bath. Kushina's mind whirled. Kyuubi sees her as Naruto's mate? What the hell? Besides that, it was obvious that drugs were affecting him, but he was also affected by her own actions. Those shudders were him ignoring his body to avoid doing anything to her. He was considerate, and hurt himself in order to avoid hurting her. Then she thought of the past 2 months. No, she was not his mother, but the best friend she could be to him. She knew she loved him, but was that a mother's love or another type? He had been quite understanding, and loving to her. The time she spent with him was even greater than with Minato. Then she thought of what she just saw. She had felt it the third day she knew him, but seeing it was another thing. His number was enormous, much bigger than Minato's. A 10-inch pole that was as thick as 3 fingers. She held her fingers up in front of her eyes. She blushed as she thought of how big it was with all its veins pulsing, and the angry red color it had been while it was swollen. She didn't know what she needed to do, but her mind screamed at her. You know what you want to do, it said. Kushina blushed. But could she do it with her own son? You haven't treated him like a son at all. Stop fooling yourself. Her mind answered back. But what does my heart say? She asked. Her mother had always said to follow her heart. Freak the blonde fox, she received, as she looked into her heart. She blushed deep red, as she finally nodded, knowing what she was going to do, but she had to prepare a bit. So she undressed herself, and looked at her body in the mirror, mapping out curves that no one had seen in 18 years. She smiled, as she was still youthful with her Uzumaki regeneration. She would look young and healthy until she was almost 180. She removed her bra, but kept her red cotton panties on, and put an oversized shirt on to hide her body while sitting down on the bed waiting for Naruto to come out. She couldn't believe she was actually going to do this. Her heart beat loudly in her ears as she stared at the bathroom door awaiting her son. The thought brought a familiar heat to her loins. She rubbed her legs together unconsciously as she sat there. She had decided that she wanted to do this, but did that mean it was right? Her inner musings were cut short as the doorknob started to turn, and her heart leaped in her chest as she thought to herself, it doesn't matter if it's right or wrong, just that I am helping him, as any parent would to stop their child from hurting. She rationalized, as she spread her legs slightly, allowing a hint of her red panties to be seen by him as she relaxed on the bed. She watched, with no small amount of trepidation, the door swing open, and Naruto stepped out of the bath with his blonde hair sticking up yet seemingly falling around him because of its dampness. Her eyes traveled down from his hair to his still closed eyes. She took this moment to take in his chiseled chest, taking note of a scar, the shape of a fist that seemed cauterized at the edges of the scar tissues, the only blemish on his otherwise perfect skin. Her eyes traveled further down, as he took a few steps in with his eyes still closed. She saw he only had his boxers on, but his pants were in his hands. She wondered why he didn't put them back on, but it was quickly answered, as she saw his erection still raging, and poking at the flimsy piece of cloth in front of it, the only thing keeping it hidden from her gaze. Her gaze went further, and she took in his muscled legs, and she idly wondered how hard his thrusts would be. She blushed red, and her eyes snapped to him, as she sensed movement from his lids. She smiled at him, as his jaw was suddenly on the ground, and his member twitched from his sight. She felt the heat in her loins increase, as his hungry gaze traveled over her exposed body, and finally rested on her eyes, as she smiled at him. His gaze was half-lidded, and she could see the pure lust in his eyes, as he stared at her. But he did not move. He simply stared into her eyes, indicating that he wanted to do something, but his indomitable will stopped him. Her smile widened, and she patted the bed next to her. Come sit here, Naruto-kun. We have something to discuss, she said coyly. Naruto nodded dumbly, the lust having apparently taken over his usually clear mind. He looked down at Kushina, and was happy he had found a partner in her. Told you, Kit, though you will probably outlive her. It said. Doesn't matter, I won't outlive her by long, you saw to that, he replied. His voice stirred Kushina, and she opened her eyes to look up at Naruto. She smiled slightly. That was amazing, she said. Naruto's smile couldn't have been brighter. You were, he said, as he leaned in for a kiss. What he didn't see was the flash of guilt that appeared on her face. Kushina pushed away from him, leaving her body naked to him, as she stood up and looked away. Naruto turned a curious look to her, though inside he could feel his heart breaking, as he was almost sure of what was about to happen. That shouldn't have happened. I shouldn't have done that, she said to herself. A parent helping her child to stop hurting? What kind of excuse is that? She whispered. Naruto's eyes hardened slightly, but he still said, What's wrong? Concern obvious in his voice. He saw Kushina stiffen, and for a moment she seemed to argue with herself before she started to gather her clothes, putting them on, as she spoke. We shouldn't have done this, she said. Naruto shook his head. Why not? Because we are mother and son. This is just wrong, she said. Naruto's eyes hardened. Is that really the way you think? He asked, a hint of something dangerous underneath it. Kushina hesitated for a moment before she straightened up after grabbing the last of her clothes and slipping her shirt on. Yes, she said, as she turned around to face him. She almost flinched back. Naruto stared at his mother with cold eyes that she hadn't seen since he had talked with her the night she entered Konoha. Very well, he said emotionlessly, as he climbed out of bed and began to gather his things, as well. Kushina watched as, within a minute, Naruto was fully dressed and ready to go. Konoha is about a day's long run from here. We should reach it at nightfall. Let's go, Naruto said, as he walked out of the room. Kushina stood there, biting her lip for a few seconds, pondering what she had done, before turning and leaving the raunchy-smelling room, closing the door behind her, leaving the evidence of their debauchery to the maids of the hotel. Time skipped nightfall. Kushina looked at Naruto's back as they landed on the main road leading to Konoha. They would be there in less than 5 minutes, but they couldn't tree jump, as policy stated you entered the village through its gates, and in plain sight of the guards. Naruto had set a grueling pace with his speed, but she had kept up just fine. Her training had not slackened at all, and she had been sparring with Naruto recently too, so she could move faster than most anyone else. She truly felt that what she had done was wrong, and did not try to change her opinion on it, but it was obviously hurting Naruto. His emotionless facade rarely ever came back in front of her, and it was only really there when Sasuke would show up or perhaps Sakura. The rest of the time he was easily the most fun to be around, and the life of wherever he went. But on the way back, since he had spoken to her in the hotel, he had not said a word, instead ignoring her, and speeding up any time she tried to draw near him to speak. She knew he had said that he would avoid her if she tried to be a mother, but she was just trying to mend her friendship with him. Despite what she had said, her heart ached as she saw him reject her. It was obvious he had been extremely hurt by her declaration. Now was her chance though. He couldn't run from her, not with protocol. She walked up next to him, and saw him stiffen, but he did not increase his pace, as that would be seen as hostile by the guards, which she could see were coming into view. Naruto-kun, she said while trying to lay a hand on his shoulder. He took a step to the right all without breaking his stride, as his eyes flashed over to her. What do you want, Kushina-san? He asked in his cold, emotionless tone. His eyes, as if an icy pond reflecting anything they saw back at her, not allowing his normally expressive eyes to show anything of his inner feelings. She flinched slightly. I guess I deserve that, she said sadly. I just wanted to apologize for saying that back in the hotel. I didn't mean it, she added quietly. Saying what exactly, Kushina-san? He asked coldly, his fury almost palpable, as he continued, that it was a mistake having sex with me, or that you and I are mother and son? He calmed himself with a few deep breaths and looked back into Kushina's sad eyes. It matters not. You have made your feelings clear. We can never have the relationship I would want anyways. After this, please don't speak to me again, he said. Kushina stopped dead in her tracks as his words registered. Her heart stopped and her eyes widened. She stared at his back as he continued walking. I am going to turn the report in. You may go home. Live a good life, he said. The guards waved him through the gate, and with that he disappeared. Kushina's mind shut down as she heard his declaration. Her heart was breaking in two as she felt him distance himself. A searing pain erupted in her chest, as if her heart was being wrenched from its place with a burning fork. She clutched her chest with one hand as she walked forward, unconsciously providing her papers for admission before walking away from the gates, leaving her papers with them. Her eyes stared ahead of her, seeing nothing, as her body unconsciously led her to her apartment. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. The most prominent of the last scene is still replaying in her head. After this, please don't speak to me again, he had said before walking off, as if they had not just spent a night of love-making, as if she were nothing to him. Her hands reached forward and opened her apartment door. She walked inside and shut the door behind her, as her unseeing eyes gazed around her living room. It was littered with pictures of herself and Naruto, of the past 2 months they had spent together, and what they had done. She walked further into her apartment, until a realization struck her. This used to be his apartment, she thought, as she walked into her bedroom. She allowed her body to fall onto her bed, and then, only when she was completely alone, and blocked by the seals built into her walls, did she allow herself to realize what she had just done. That same searing pain struck again, and her body shook, as she realized she had just pushed away the last piece of happiness she had in her life. Naruto appeared in Tsunade's office, his emotionless mask in full force, as he looked at his Bachan and Jiraiya. Here to report, Bachan, he said in an emotionless tone, drawing their attention away from each other, and to him. The two elder shinobi both took on serious looks as they saw Naruto's shinobi mode, something that hadn't made an appearance since his fight with Madara. Go ahead, Tsunade said, as she steepled her hands and rested her chin on her hands. Naruto proceeded to tell of how he ran straight to the camp and obliterated it with some of Kyuubi's own techniques. He explained how he had summoned Kushina, then they had blown the base up and proceeded home. He left so he could talk with Kyuubi and the night Kushina and he had spent in the hotel. Tsunade and Jiraiya both knew he was hiding something. He was obviously pissed about the mad doctor, but something else had their godson ruffled. Is that Naruto? Tsunade asked, not to use her nickname. Naruto didn't hesitate at all, as he replied, Hi Hokage-sama. Tsunade and Jiraiya frowned. Gaki, what's wrong? Jiraiya asked, letting his concern show through. Naruto turned his eyes to Jiraiya, and he caught a glimpse of the overwhelming sadness Naruto was feeling right now. He felt his breath hitch, as Tsunade's did the same right next to him. Something you can help with, Jiraiya. I will be fine, but I need a few days, he said, his emotionless mask cracking a bit at the sight of his two most precious people. Tsunade looked at him critically before waving her hand. Very well, I will call you in 3 days, Naruto, she said, giving him a pointed look that said they were going to talk about it. Naruto nodded, but he was certain he was not going to tell them just yet, as he wanted to let himself accept this. Naruto shunned Shin away. Tsunade sighed. You know it has something to do with Kushina, Jiraiya said. Before today they were nigh inseparable for 2 months, and now he shows up without her? He questioned. Tsunade nodded. Yes, but this is their life, and I don't want to interfere before they have a chance to work it out for themselves, she said. Jiraiya nodded, and the two looked out over Konoha watching the sun set. Naruto appeared in front of his clan house. He sighed as he opened the door and walked inside. He managed to make it to his room before his emotionless mask started to break. His eyes grew blurry as tears collected. He blinked and felt them run down his face as he allowed his body to fall onto his bed, his clothes having somehow come off. As he walked to his bedroom, he laid there in just his boxers clutching his aching chest. It's just like Sakura. He thought. Kit, Kyuubi said from its cage. What do you want now, Kyuubi? Naruto thought back through his grief. Kyuubi emerged from the dark, showing its full body and splendor to his container. He leaned down and put his massive eye in front of him. I'm sorry, he said. Naruto blinked as he looked up at the giant fox within him. What? He said. I'm sorry, he repeated. Naruto stared up at Kyuubi. Why me? He asked quietly. Why must I go through life alone? He cried. Kyuubi just stared at him with pain in his eyes, for the first time feeling something other than rage and evil. Naruto, without a second thought, walked forward and into the cage, surprising Kyuubi. Naruto walked to Kyuubi's backside and rubbed a few tails, enjoying the feeling of softness. He finally just laid down on some tails and pulled the rest on top of him as he let his grief consume him. Kyuubi just watched sadly as his seemingly indomitable jailer cried his heart out. Time skipped 2 weeks. Kushina looked up as her door was knocked upon. She had sequestered herself into her apartment for the better part of a week. She hadn't felt like leaving, as she wallowed in grief over what she had done. When she had finally decided she could pick herself up, she was determined to fix her relationship with Naruto. She wouldn't have intimate relations, but she did want to have his friendship back. Unfortunately, he refused to see her, or if he did, he ignored her completely. When she had finally managed to get an answer out of him, he had only one thing to say. I warned you what would happen if you decided to only see me as a son, and treat me like it. You ignored me. When I finally think you decided you could see more than that, you go and turn around that thought not even 5 seconds after I thought it. It was just like what Sakura did when she confessed to me. I have no interest in you, Kushina-san. Leave me alone, he had said before disappearing from her sight. She had come back to her apartment and spent the last day and a half trying to figure out what she could do. She maintained that what she had done was simply to protect her son from hurting, and was in no way her own desire to have sex with him. She refused to accept the fact she had enjoyed, and actually wanted more of what he had given her, even if it was subconsciously. So, she was now stuck in a life with no happiness, and the only relative she actually had resented her for actions she knew she should have avoided, but could not come to admit that was the case. She sighed as she opened her door and said yes. She was utterly surprised when she found herself thrown back into her apartment, redressed in a red cocktail dress, and was being pushed back towards the door with heels in her hands as her 3 friends looked at her. Enough moping around. I don't know what has gotten into you, but let's have some fun, Anko said from behind her as she pushed. I rarely agree with Anko, but you seem to have been depressed lately, and I think getting out would be good for you, Kurinai said. Let's go party while our husbands watch the kids. It's been too long, Yugogo added. Kushina smiled slightly at her friends. She knew they were trying to help, so she let them pull her across town and into a bar where 4 of the most beautiful kunoichi took a booth by themselves, drawing the attention of the crowd. And so the drinks started to flow, and the 4 kunoichi began to talk about their problems, namely the men in their lives. Kamiyasuma is so bad with those damn nicotine patches. It is much better than those damn cigarettes, but he gets so temperamental without them, Kurinai said, as she drank her sake. Oh, if Iruka-kun wasn't so damn good in bed, I would castrate him for spending so much time grading papers, Anko retorted. Kushina blushed slightly at that comment, but none of the kunoichi seemed to notice. Asuma is great in bed. It just sucks kissing him. He tastes like ash, Kurinai admitted. Hey, it may seem sick, but damn if he isn't the dominant one in bed. That guy sure can hide some serious technique behind that cough, Yugogo said to the chagrin of the other 2 ladies. What about you, Kushina? Anyone caught your eye? Anko asked teasingly. Kushina blushed slightly and looked down, as an image of Naruto flashed across her mind. Naruto? Why would I, she thought. Oh, someone did, Anko said, as if making some big discovery. Come on, give us the details, we want to know everything about him. What does he look like? How strong is he? How is he in bed? Yugogo suddenly rambled off. Anko looked at Yugogo, as Kushina blushed a heavy red from the last question. You stole my buzz, Anko accused Yugogo. Yugogo shrugged. You were too slow, she said. I was pausing for dramatic effect, Anko retorted. A clearing of Kurinai's throat was enough to show that they had gone off into their own little world, and they both returned with big grins on their faces. So? Kurinai asked. Kushina shook her head, and swirled her sake. I don't want to talk about him, she said, embarrassed that her mind immediately threw Naruto at her, as her boyfriend material. Honestly, it wasn't that surprising. She shouldn't be surprised, as he was the only male she actually spent time with in almost 2 decades. Of course he would be prime material, but the fact he was everything she wanted in a boyfriend, and more her mind chimed in causing her to blush deepen, did compound on the fact. Oh, she already did him. How is he? I wanna know, Anko said while bouncing in her seat. She may be older, but her personality was much the same. Kushina just shook her head. Drop it. Even if you knew you wouldn't approve, so just forget it. She sounded regretful at the end of that. Did she miss what Naruto had done? No, she only missed his company. The 3 women all narrowed their eyes, but dropped the subject in favor of a more popular one. Per Naruto, he is going to be so crushed, Kurinai said, as she looked down at her sake. Kushina's head snapped to Kurinai's, a fact Anko, and Yugogo noticed. What do you mean by that? She asked. Kurinai looked up. It's just every time he has a female in his life they all seem to leave. I mean the guy went out with like 4 girls, and all 4 of them left him for one of his friends, she explained. Kushina's eyes widened. Poor guy probably thinks he's destined to be alone all his life, Kurinai ended. Yugogo picked up, as she too realized what Kurinai was saying. He was getting awfully attached to you. He may not love you like them, and you may not be going out, but he will feel like you are abandoning him for some other guy, she said. Of course you're not. It's just you might want to break it to him slowly, Anko said, as she rubbed her curse mark, more than aware of what Naruto had gone through than most anyone else. Kushina's mind whirled, as the implications she hadn't thought of crashed down onto her, weighing her down. She gripped the table hard, as her vision faded, and she saw the 2 months they spent just getting to know each other, and spending time together just as a couple would. How he had restrained himself from taking that next step with her until she opened the floodgates he had kept in his heart, and spent the night making love to him. How she must have sounded when she told him that they were mother and son, and shouldn't be together. How his words about her and Sakura were truer than most anything ever spoken before. Her eyes misted, as she hung her head in shame. Stupid, 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 Kushina said, accentuating each word with a pound of her fist on the wooden table, shaking it with each blow. Hey now, he would want you to be happy. He isn't going to hold this against you, Kurinai said, as she wrapped an arm around Kushina since she was sitting next to her. Kushina just let her head fall on the table, and let her tears spill out, as quiet sobs racked her body. How could I have been so blind? She whispered to herself. What's wrong? Yugogo asked, as her hand came across the table, and gripped Kushina's. Kushina just sat there for a few moments before Kurinai's voice sounded again. It's Naruto, isn't it? She said. Kushina's eyes snapped to hers, but Anko and Yugo were both confused. Of course she is talking about Naruto. Who else would we be talking about? Anko said. Kurinai shook her head, as she stared into Kushina's emerald orbs, bloodshot with tears. No, what I mean is the man she likes is Naruto. Kurinai started bringing about shocked looks from Anko and Yugogo. Kushina hung her head. I know it's wrong, but I just couldn't stop it. He was the perfect friend from the start, always there, completely supportive, anything I needed, and he was there for it. Everything was going great. Her voice barely more than a whisper, as she spoke. Then he was assigned a mission to destroy a base where this mad doctor was making a mind-rape drug, and using it to make SAG slaves. 3 sources of Ki flowed from the booth. As the Kunoichi felt their anger from such a thing, Kushina continued ignoring their Ki. He obliterated the base, all by himself. He tore the doctor to shreds with the Kyuubi's chakra. All 3 Kunoichi nodded. As much as Naruto was a legend, so was his temperament about perverts. He summoned me after, and I noticed he had been injected with something. We blew the base up, and started to return home. He was a bit aloof from me after he found out what the drug was, but he never told me the effects, she explained. So, on the second day, about mid-afternoon, I noticed he was running a bit of a fever. I forced him to take a night and rest to allow Kyuubi to flush his system. When the attendant leered at me, Naruto growled at him, and threatened to castrate him if he even looked at me again. He tapped into Kyuubi's chakra to enhance his threat, she said quietly. The girls were all leaning forward enraptured in the story, as all traces of surprise left their faces. They were willing to listen to their friend. We got upstairs, and almost immediately he ran into the bathroom, and began taking a cold shower. I wondered what was wrong, but suddenly heard him screaming in the bathroom. So I kicked the door in. At this Kushina blushed, and Anko gained a mischievous glint, but Kushina continued before she could start to tease her. He was completely naked, and had a raging hard-on. Apparently, the drug enhanced his libido, and he was having trouble controlling it around me. She admitted to the shock of all present, even Kurinai. So I replaced the door, and argued with myself over what to do. Eventually I decided to relieve him so that the drug would be purged. I asked why QB hadn't flushed it, but he replied with something I hadn't expected. She paused before taking the plunge. Apparently QB sees me as Naruto's mate, and didn't feel it necessary to remove the urge. She blushed, as the girls' shocked faces were accompanied with dropped jaws. We spent the night making love, and when we woke up, she bit her lip. As her tears reappeared, I immediately felt guilty. Even though my rationalization was I was helping my child stop hurting, I knew I shouldn't have done what I did. She shook her head. I told him, as such, and he asked me if I was sure about that. When I answered yes, he turned into a cold, emotionless person I met when I first saw him. I don't know what to do. I just want my Naruto back, she said, as she started to cry again. The three women sat there stunned, as they saw their friend break down and cry, each holding their own thoughts, but as their eyes locked they knew what they had to do. But first, to test it. So Anko started getting Kushina to look back up. How was he? She asked with a mischievous grin. Kushina spluttered. What? She asked. How was he? Anko repeated. You know, in bed, Yugogo added. Kushina blushed a deep red, but she stared at her friends, and asked, You're not disgusted? I did it with my own son, she exclaimed, though it was only loud enough for them to hear. Kurinai shrugged. That depends. How was he? She asked. Kushina looked at her friends for a few seconds. I don't understand. Answer the question, woman, or would you like to just wallow in grief? Anko said. Kushina gulped, then blushed a deep red, as her eyes glazed over. In a word, perfect. The three friends grinned. How big was he? We don't care if he is related to you or not. Hell, he could be your grandson, and we wouldn't care, Kurinai said. All we want is for you to be happy. And does Naruto make you happy? Kushina smiled brightly as she said yes. Then here is what you need to do. You're going to go to his house, march into his room, strip down, and Anko said, trailing off. You're going to show him that you see him, not as a son, not as a friend, not even as a lover, but as a person you want to spend the rest of your life with, and that you will do whatever he wants to make that come true, Yugogo said. Kushina's eyes misted, but she simply smiled at her friends. Thank you, she whispered. Now why exactly are you still here? Kurinai asked. I can't wait until we show Naruto to Asuma, Irika, and Hate, she giggled. Kushina simply disappeared in a shunshin. Did we do the right thing? They are going to be looked down upon, Yugogo whispered. Naruto has been looked down upon his whole life. I am willing to bet he will be happier than ever before, Kurinai said. Besides, anyone who wants to look at them wrong will be on the end of mine, yours, Kurinai's, Tsunade's, Jiraiya's, and Naruto's kanai, Anko said. The three women smiled at each other before they raised their drinks. To love, they toasted, as they drained their drinks in one swallow. Kushina appeared before Naruto's home. She had permission from the seals to be allowed within the grounds, and apparently Naruto had never changed it. Her green eyes were shining with a determination they hadn't had in years. She reached out with her senses to feel for Naruto. She nodded when she sensed him in his room. She kicked her heels off so she wouldn't make much noise when walking on his floors, and proceeded up the small flight of stairs to his front door. She idly noted that she was now only dressed in her cocktail dress, and a pair of crimson panties, almost the same outfit she was wearing when she had first made love to him. She opened his door, and shut it quietly. She didn't even look at the living room, as she passed silently through it, heading straight to his room. She walked up the stairs, and reached the second floor. As silent as a ghost, she glided down the hallway, and reached his room. She was about to open the door when she heard a choked sob come from inside. She leaned her ear to the door, and listened in. Why must I always be alone? Naruto's hoarse voice came through the door. Kushina's heart clenched, and she clutched her chest, as pain went through her heart for hurting the one she loved like this. But her previous determination returned full force, as she straightened her back, and opened his door. She stood in the doorway looking at him, as his eyes snapped to her. He was in just a pair of pants. It was obvious he had been crying, but not for very long, as if he had just got home, and after he laid down to go to bed he started. His body was clean, and his hair was as spiky as ever. Her heart clenched again, as his eyes turned icy cold. What do you want? He asked, though his tone was broken by his hoarse voice. Kushina almost flinched, but she held her head high, as she walked to his bed, swaying her hips tantalizingly. She enjoyed that his eyes flickered to her hips as she did this. She reached the end of the bed, and looked down at him, as he lay on his back. She reached behind herself and grabbed the zipper on the back of her dress. She ripped it down and let her dress fall around her legs, leaving her red areola bare to his eyes. She stepped out of the dress and climbed onto the bed, all the time noticing his wary eyes, but she could see the hidden longing in them. She crawled up to his side, took his arm, and put it around her body so she was nestled into his armpit, then laid her head on his shoulder, cuddling up to him in just her panties, just as they had been the morning after their night of lovemaking. She reached over and rubbed that fist-shaped scar on his chest. "If you tell me something I want to hear, I'll tell you something you want to hear," she said quietly. "Haven't you done enough?" he asked coldly. She flinched, and he could feel it, but she just looked up into his eyes with her own pleading. "Please?" she asked, almost as if begging, a lump in her throat. Naruto could never deny his precious peoples, and this was no different. This wasn't the woman that had been insisting they were mother and son, that was obvious, so he nodded. "How did you get this scar? You never mentioned anything that would do this," she asked. Naruto stiffened. "You remember why I turn cold whenever Sasuke is around?" he asked, his voice growing soft and warm like normal, as the hand Kushina had placed on her back started to rub circles. She bit her lip, as her body seemed just as sensitive to his touch as 2 weeks ago. "Yes," she replied. "He ran to Orochimaru, right?" At Kushina's nod he began. "Well, we had been sent to retrieve him from Orochimaru's personal bodyguards. Shikamaru, Niji, Kiba, Rock Lee, and Chuji, all of us went, and we almost died because of it. Each of them dropped off to fight one of the bodyguards, but I went on to reach Sasuke at the Valley of the End," he said, as Kushina mewed under his hand, as she felt the heat in her loins start to intensify. "When I got there, we fought, and it was an intense battle. Without Kyuubi I would have died. This scar." He put his other hand over her own, and traced it with her. "It is from when he plunged 2 Chidori through my chest. One when I started to use Kyuubi's chakra, and once when we clashed underneath the waterfall." Kushina nodded. "Now what did you want to tell me?" he asked. Kushina drew a shuddering breath, and said, "You know how you said you loved my red hair?" she asked. Naruto nodded, as the hand that had been making circles suddenly started running through her locks. "Well, when I was younger, I hated my hair," she admitted. "It took your father rescuing me to actually start to like it when he told me he loved my hair." Naruto's eyes widened. "Like father, like son, I guess," she said. "Do you know what I told him the first time we made love?" she asked Naruto with his narrowing eyes. She rolled on top of Naruto and pressed herself to his chest. "There is something I will tell only the people who say they like my hair." She leaned up and whispered in his ear, "I Shidori Narukuin." Naruto looked at her with narrowed eyes. "Don't play with me," he said, his voice began to regain its iciness. Kushina looked him dead in the eyes and let loose all of the lust she had unconsciously accumulated for him in the past 2 months and 2 weeks. "I'm not lying, Narukuin. I don't care if we are related. I don't care if others look down on us. All that matters is that I want to be with you for the rest of my life," she said, meaning every word. Naruto's cold exterior began to crack, but he held fast until Kushina spoke again. "I will do anything you ask of me, Narukuin. Anything you want, and I will not ever bring our past into it again, but I want to spend the rest of my life with you. You make me happy," she admitted. She looked down, as she whispered, "Do I make you happy?" Naruto's icy cold exterior broke, as he felt her emotions pour out of her with that one question, the fear of rejection in her statement. His hands came up and wrapped around Kushina, as he leaned in and said yes. Kushina's head shot up, and she locked her lips with Naruto's as the two began to make out. Once the two separated, he sighed and went to move, but Kushina's hands shot up, and she said, "Good morning, Narukoi." While smiling at him, he looked down and replied, "Morning, Koibito." Kushina smiled a million-watt smile. "Aishidori," she said. Naruto's eyes filled with tears as he said Aishidori. The two lovers kissed, and they spent the rest of their longer than normal lives reviving a dead clan. The Uzumaki clan lived on the elemental countries once more. The end. Thanks for watching my video, and make sure to check out the author of this fanfic. Link is in the description. See you next time. Till then, sayonara.